Hello, hello, hello! Hi, anime fanatic! Welcome to the stream. I hope you're doing well today. For anyone who has not met me before, hello! I'm Athena Saibo. It's nice to meet you. Today, we are continuing on with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Where we left off. Our intrepid heroes found themselves inside this otherworldly beast, which turned out to be a ship called the Nautilus, and were allowed on board. And our viewpoint character, Professor Aronnax, was given a tour of the Nautilus by Captain Nemo. I was playing a horror game, so I scared. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, good news. Bedtime story time. Yay! And we are about 22% of the way through the book. Yes. About 22% of the way through. Super. Yes. Hello, Skelly. Welcome to the stream. I hope you're doing well today. Are we all ready to go? All snug as a bug? Got a blankie? Maybe a snack and a drink? Beef. I agree, Bunny. Hello, Bunny. Welcome to the stream. I hope you're doing well today. Is everyone all snuggled in? This is new. Well, it's newer. I've done it a couple times now, but it is certainly a newer screen. Shall we begin reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, chat? I think we should. Now, we left off on chapter 13, which has the title, Some Figures. Which I think means there's gonna be a lot of numbers, so hang tight with me, chat. Alright. A moment later, we were seated on a couch in the lounge, cigars between our lips. The captain placed before my eyes a working drawing that gave the ground plan, cross-section, and side view of the Nautilus. Then he began his description as follows. Here, Professor Aronnax, are the different dimensions of this boat now transporting you. It's a very long cylinder with conical ends. It noticeably takes the shape of a cigar, a shape already adopted in London for several projects of the same kind. The length of the cylinder from end to end is exactly 70 meters, and its maximum breadth of beam is 8 meters. So it isn't quite built on the 10-to-1 ratio of your high-speed steamers, but its lines are sufficiently long and their tampering gradual enough so that the displaced water easily slips past and poses no obstacle to the ship's movement. These two dimensions allow you to obtain, via simple calculation, the surface area and volume of the Nautilus. Its surface area totals 1,011.45 square meters, its volume 1,507.2 cubic meters, which is tantamount to saying that when it is completely submerged, it displaces 1,500 cubic meters of water, or weighs 1,500 metric tons. In drawing up plans for a ship meant to navigate underwater, I wanted, when floating on the waves, to lie 9/10 below the surface and to emerge only 1/10. Consequently, under these conditions, it needed to displace only 9/10 of its volume, hence 1,356.48 cubic meters. In other words, it has to weigh only the same number of metric tons, so I was obligated not to exceed this weight while building it to the aforesaid dimensions. The Nautilus is made up of two hulls, one inside the other. Between them, joining them together, are iron T-bars that give the ship the utmost rigidity. In fact, thanks to this cellular arrangement, it has the resistance of a stone block, as if it were completely solid. Its plating can't give away. It's self-adhering and not dependent on the tightness of its rivets. And due to the perfect union of its materials, the solidarity of its construction allows it to defy the most violent seas. The two hulls are manufactured from boilerplate steel, whose relative density is 7.8 times that of water. The first hull has a thickness of no less than 5 centimeters and weighs 394.96 metric tons. My second hull, the outer cover, includes a keel 50 centimeters high by 25 wide, which by itself weighs 62 metric tons. This hull, the engine, the ballast, the various accessories and accommodations, plus the bulkheads and interior braces, have a combined weight of 961.52 metric tons, which when added to 394.96 metric tons give us the desired total of 1,356.48 metric tons. Clear? Clear, I replied. New content style for you. I mean, I don't think I've seen you do this before. I've done it a couple times before, but it is certainly not a common thing for me just yet. Alright. So, the captain went on, when the Nautilus lies on the waves under these conditions, 1/10 of it does emerge above water. Now then, if I provide some ballast tanks equal to capacity to that 1/10, hence able to hold 150.72 metric tons, and if I fill them with water, the boat then displaces 1,507.2 metric tons, or it weighs that much, and it would be completely submerged. That's what comes out about, Professor. These ballast tanks exist within easy access to the lower reaches of the Nautilus. I open some stopcocks, the tank fills, the boat sinks, and it's exactly flush with the surface of the water. Fine, Captain, but now we come to a genuine difficulty. You're able to lie flush with the surface of the ocean, that I understand. But lower down, while diving beneath that surface, isn't your submersible going to encounter a pressure, and consequently undergo an upward thrust, that must be assessed at 1 atmosphere per every 30 feet of water, hence at about 1 kilogram per each square centimeter? Precisely, sir. Then unless you fill up the whole Nautilus, I don't see how you can force it down into the heart of these liquid masses. Professor, Captain Nemo replied, static objects mustn't be confused with dynamic ones, or will be open to serious error. Comparatively little effort is spent in reaching the ocean's lower regions, because all objects have a tendency to become sinkers. Follow my logic here. I'm all ears, Captain. When I wanted to determine that increase in weight the Nautilus needed to be given in order to submerge, I had only to take notes of the proportionate reduction in volume that salt water experiences in deeper and deeper strata. That's obvious, I replied. Now then, if water isn't absolutely incompressible, at least it compresses very little. In fact, according to the most recent calculations, this reduction is only 0.0000436 per atmosphere, or per every 30 feet of depth. For instance, to go 1,000 meters down, I must take into account the reduction in volume that occurs under a pressure equivalent to that of a 1,000-meter column of water, in other words, under a pressure of 100 atmospheres. In this instance, the reduction would be 0.00436. Consequently, I have to increase my weight from 1,507.2 metric tons to 1,513.77. So the added weight would only be 6.57 metric tons. That's all. That's all, Professor Arnox, and the calculation is easy to check. Now then, I have supplementary ballast tanks capable of shipping 100 metric tons of water, so I can descend to considerable depths. When I want to rise again and lie flush with the surface, all I have to do is expel that water. And if I desire that, the Nautilus can merge above the waves to 1/10 of its total capacity. I empty all the ballast tanks completely. This logic, backed up by figures, left me without a single objection. I accept your calculations, Captain, I replied, and I'd be ill-mannered to dispute them, since your daily experience bears them out. But at this juncture, I have a hunch that we're still left with one real difficulty. What's that, sir? When you're at a depth of 1,000 meters, the Nautilus plating bears a pressure of 100 atmospheres. If at this point you want to empty the supplementary ballast tanks in order to lighten your load and rise to the surface, your pumps must overcome that pressure of 100 atmospheres, which is 100 kilograms per each square centimeter. This demands a strength that electricity alone can give me. Captain Nemo said swiftly. Sir, I repeat, the dynamic power of my engines is nearly infinite. The Nautilus pumps have a prodigious strength, as you must have noticed when their waterspouts swept like a torrent over the Abraham Lincoln. Besides, I use my supplementary ballast tanks only to reach an average depth of 150 to 2,000 meters. Not 100, to 1,500 to 2,000 meters, and that with a view to conserving my machinery. Accordingly, when I have a mind to visit the ocean depths 2 or 3 vertical leagues beneath the surface, I use maneuvers that are more time-consuming but no less invaluable. Wait, if they're empty the water tanks, where does the replacement air come from? Plants probably. I can't remember. I don't know. I'm sure they'll explain. They're very good at that. What are they, Captain? I asked. Here, I'm naturally led into telling you how the Nautilus is maneuvered. I can't wait to find out. In order to steer this boat to port or starboard, in short, to make turns on a horizontal plane, I use an ordinary wide-bladed rudder that's fastened to the rear of the stern post and worked by a wheel and tackle. But I can also move the Nautilus upward and downward on a vertical plane by the simple method of slanting its 2 fins, which are attached to its sides at its center of flotation. These fins are flexible, able to assume any position, and can be operated from insides by means of powerful levers. If these fins stay parallel with the boat, the latter moves horizontally. If they slant, the Nautilus follows the angle of that slant and, under its propeller's thrust, either sinks on a diagonal or as steep as it suits me, or rises on that diagonal. And similarly, if I want to return more swiftly to the surface, I throw the propeller in gear, and the water's pressure makes the Nautilus to rise vertically, as an air balloon inflated with hydrogen lifts swiftly into the skies. Bravo, Captain! I exclaim. But in the midst of the waters, how can your helmsman follow the course you've given him? My helmsman is stationed behind the windows of a pilot house, which protrudes from the topside of the Nautilus hull and is fitted with the biconvex glass. Is glass capable of resisting such pressures? Perfectly capable. Though fragile on impact, crystal can still offer considerable resistance. In 1864, during experiments on fishing by electric light in the middle of the North Sea, glass panes less than 70 millimeters thick were seen to resist a pressure of 16 atmospheres, all the while letting through strong, heat-generated rays whose warmth was unevenly distributed. Now then, I use glass windows measuring no less than 21 centimeters at their centers. In other words, they're 30 times the thickness. Fair enough, Captain, but if we're going to sea, we need light to drive away the dark. And in the midst of the murky waters, I wonder how your helmsman can. Set astern at the pilot house, is a powerful electric reflector whose rays light up the sea for a distance of half a mile. Oh, bravo! Bravo 3 times over, Captain! That explains the phosphorescent glow from this so-called narwhal that so puzzled us scientists. Pertinent to this, I'll ask you if the Nautilus running afoul of this Scotia, which caused such a great uproar was the result of an accidental encounter. Entirely accidental, sir. I was navigating 2 meters beneath the surface of the water when the collision occurred. However, I could see that it had no dire consequences. None, sir, but as for your encounter with the Abraham Lincoln? Professor, that troubled me, because it's one of the best ships in the gallant American Navy. But they attacked me and I had to defend myself. All the same, I was content simply to put the frigate in a condition where it could do me no harm. It won't have any difficulty getting repairs at the nearest port. Ah, Commander, I exclaim with conviction, your Nautilus is truly a marvelous boat. Yes, Professor, Captain Nemo replied with genuine excitement, and I love it as if it were my own flesh and blood. Aboard a conventional ship, facing the ocean's perils, danger lurks everywhere. On the surface of the sea, your chief sensation of the constant feeling of an underlying chasm, as the Dutchman Jason so aptly put it. But below the waves aboard the Nautilus, your heart never fails you. There are no structural deformities to worry about, because the double hull of this boat has the rigidity of iron. No rigging to be worn out by rolling and pinching on the waves. No sails for the wind to carry off, no boilers for steam to burst open, no fires to fear, because the submersible is made of sheet iron, not wood. No coal to run out of, since electricity is its mechanical force. No collisions to fear, because it navigates the waters deep all by itself. No storms to brave, because just a few meters beneath the waves it finds absolute tranquility. There, sir. There's the ideal ship. And if it's true that the engineer has more confidence in a craft than the builder, and the builder has more than the captain himself, you can understand the utter abandon with which I place my trust in this Nautilus, since I am its captain, builder, and engineer all in one. Captain Nemo spoke with winning eloquence. The fire in his eyes and the passion in his gestures transfigured him. Yes, he loved his ship the same way a father loves his child. But one question, perhaps indirect, naturally popped up, and I couldn't resist asking it. You're an engineer, then, Captain Nemo? Yes, Professor, he answered me. I studied in London, Paris, and New York back in the days when I was a resident of the Earth's continents. But how were you able to build this wonderful Nautilus in secret? Each part of it, Captain Arnox, came from a different spot on the globe and reached me at a cover address. Its keel was forged by Creusot in France, its propeller shaft by Penn & Co. in London, the sheet iron plates for its hull by Lards in Liverpool, its propeller by Scotts in Glasgow, its tanks were manufactured by Cal & Co. in Paris, its engine by Krupp in Prussia, its spur by the Monteal workshop in Sweden, its precision instruments by Hart Bros in New York, etc. And each of these suppliers received my specifications under a different name. But I went on. Once these parts were manufactured, didn't they have to be mounted and adjusted? Professor, I set up my workshop in a deserted inlet in mid-ocean. There our Nautilus was completed by me and my workmen, in other words, by my gallant companions who I've molded and educated. Then, when the operation was over, we burned every trace of our stay on the inlet, which if I could have, I'd have blown up. From all of this, may I assume that such a boat cost a fortune? An iron ship, Professor Arnox, runs 1,125 metric tons per metric ton. Oh, euros? It must be euros. 1,125 euros per metric ton. Now then, the Nautilus has a burden of 1,500 metric tons. Consequently, it costs 1,687,000 euros. Hence, 2 million euros, including its accommodations, and 4 million euros or 5 million euros with all the collections and works of art it contains. One last question, Professor? Asked Captain Nemo. Ask, Professor. You're rich, then? Infinitely rich, sir, and without any trouble. I could pay off the 10 billion franc French national debt. I gaped at the entire individual who had just spoken these words. Was he playing on my credulity? Time would tell. End of chapter. That was a lot of numbers. That was fun though. Wait, can't say because I'm DMing D&D right now, but I wanted to pop in and wish you a good stream. Thank you, IC! Panic. Oh no, did the bitrate crash while I wasn't looking? I apologize. The VOD will be on YouTube. At least, so anyone who misses anything, it crashed for like 5 seconds. I see. That's a long time for when you're reading. All the VOD will be up on YouTube. You can watch the first part on YouTube as well, if you are so inclined. For anything you miss. Or to watch it again later. That's also an option. But thank you, Scaly. I very much appreciate you being my bitrate alarm. Alright. It's mostly numbers, so it's fine. Yeah. Also, if I had to... Because I don't think he actually went into it. But if I had to guess where the replacement air comes from... I imagine it's like a pressure force to get the water out, but then it just stays air after that because, when you have little bubbles of air like that, you can it just stays there. Like, I guess the best example of this would be from the most pop culture example, I suppose, is more accurate. Pirates of the Caribbean. There's a scene in one of the movies where they're walking on the bottom of the ocean with just a dinghy above their heads to keep the air there. That's a real thing. And I imagine it works like that. Alright. Chapter 14. The Black Current. The part of the planet Earth that the seas occupy has been assessed at 3,832,558 square miameters. Hence more than 38 trillion hectares. Oh, hi, I remember that. Jack Sparrow being an accidental genius, yes. This liquid mass totals 2,250,000,000 cubic miles and could form a sphere with a diameter of 60 leagues, whose weight could be 3 quintillion metric tons. To appreciate such a number, we should remember that a quintillion is to a billion what a billion is to one. In other words, there are as many billions in a quintillion as ones in a billion. Now then, this liquid mass nearly equals the amount of water that has poured through all of the Earth's rivers for the past 40,000 years. During prehistoric times, an era of fire was followed by an era of water. At first, there was ocean everywhere. Then, during the Silurian period, the tops of mountains gradually appeared above the waters, above the waves. Islands emerged, disappeared beneath temporary floods, rose again, were fused to form continents, and finally the Earth's geography settled into what we have today. Solid matter had rested from the liquid matter some 37,657,000 square miles. Hence 12,900,000,000 516 million hectares. As much as I like numbers, this is a lot of numbers at once to remember. It really is. And I'm having trouble saying them. The outlines of the continent allow the sea to be divided into 5 major parts: the frozen Arctic and Antarctic Oceans, the Indian Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean extends north to south between the 2 polar circles and east to west between America and Asia, over an expanse of 145 degrees of longitude. It's the most tranquil of the seas. Its currents are wide and slow-moving, its tides moderate, its rainfall abundant. And this was the ocean that I was first destined to cross under these strangest of us species. Slight dyscalculia, dyslexia. Yeah, it's probably dyscalculia. Dyscalculia. I've never actually had to say it out loud before. It's probably, I probably have a bit of dyscalculia. Dyscalculia, yeah. The number 1. So this is difficult, but I'm doing my best. If you don't mind, Professor, Captain Nemo told me, we'll determine our exact position and fix the starting point of our voyage. It's 15 minutes before noon. I'm going to rise to the surface of the water. The captain pressed an electric bell 3 times. The pumps began to expel water from the ballast tanks. On the pressure gauge, a needle marked the decreasing pressures that indicated the Nautilus's upward progress. Then the needle stopped. Here we are, the captain said. I've got dyslexia, so letters are a little weird. I feel you, man. I made my way to the central companionway, which led to the platform. I climbed its metal steps, passed through the open hatches, and arrived topside on the Nautilus. The platform emerged only 8 centimeters above the waves. The Nautilus' bow and stern boasted that spindle-shaped outline that had caused the ship to be compared appropriately to a large cigar. I noted the slight overlap of its sheet iron plates, which resembled the scales covering the bodies of our big land reptiles. So I had a perfect natural explanation for why, despite the best spyglasses, this boat had always been mistaken for a marine animal. So audiobooks all the way. Oh yeah. I'm the audiobook. It's me. Near the middle of the platform, the skiff was half set in the ship's hull, making a slight bulge. Fore and aft stood 2 cupolas of moderate height, their sides slanting and partly inset with heavy biconvex glass, one reserved for the helmsman steering the Nautilus, the other for the brilliance of the powerful electric beacon lighting his way. The sea was magnificent, the skies clear. This long aquatic vehicle could barely feel the broad undulations of the ocean. A mild breeze out of the east rippled the surface of the water. Free of all mist, the horizon was ideal for taking sights. There was nothing to be seen. Not a reef, not an inlet. No more Abraham Lincoln. A deserted immenseness. Raising his sextant, the Captain Nemo took the altitude of the sun, which would give him his latitude. He waited for a few minutes until the orb touched the rim of the horizon. While he was taking his sights, he didn't move a muscle, and the instrument couldn't have been steadier in hands made out of marble. "Noon," he said. "Professor, whenever you're ready." I took one last look at the sea, a little yellowish near the landing places of Japan, and I went below again to the main lounge. There, the captain fixed his position and used a chronometer to calculate his longitude, which he double-checked against his previous observations of our angles. Then he told me, "Professor Arnox, we're in longitude 100... 37 degrees 15 west. West of which meridian? I asked quickly, hoping the captain's reply might give me a clue to his nationality. Sir, he replied to me, I have chronometers variously set to the meridians of Paris, Greenwich, and Washington, D.C. But in your honor, I'll use the one for Paris. This reply told me nothing. I bowed, and the commander went on. We're in longitude 137 degrees 15 west of the meridian of Paris, and latitude 30 degrees 7 north. In other words, about 300 miles from the shores of Japan. At noon on this day of November 8th, we hereby begin our voyage of exploration under the waters. May God be with us, I replied. And now, Professor, the captain added, I'll leave you to your intellectual pursuits. I've set our course east-northeast on a depth of 50 meters. Here are some large-scale charts on which you'll be able to follow that course. The lounge is at your disposal, and with your permission, I'll take my leave. Captain Nemo bowed. I was left to myself, lost in my thoughts. They all centered on the Nautilus' commander. Would I ever learn the nationality of this eccentric man who had boasted of having none? His sworn hate for humanity, a hate that perhaps was bent on some dreadful revenge. What had provoked it? Was he one of those unappreciated scholars, one of those geniuses embittered by the world, as Council expressed it? A latter-day Galileo? Of maybe one of those men of science like America's Commander Murray, whose careers were ruined by political revolutions? I couldn't say yet. As for me, whom fate had just brought aboard his vessel, whose life he had held in the balance, he had received me coolly but hospitably. Only he never took the hand I extended to him. He never extended his own. Might want to make the music a tad quieter. I'm sorry. I hope that's better. Hi, Pony. Welcome to the stream. I hope you're doing well today. For an entire hour, I was deep in these musings, trying to probe this mystery that fascinated me so. Then my eyes focused on a huge world map displayed on the table, and I put my finger on the very spot where our just determined longitude and latitude intersected. Like the continents, the sea has its rivers. These are exclusive currents that can be identified by their temperature and color, the most remarkable being the one called the Gulf Stream. Science has defined the global path of 5 chief currents, one in the North Atlantic, a second in the South Atlantic, a third in the North Pacific, a fourth in the South Pacific, and a fifth on the Southern Indian Ocean. Also, it's likely that a 6th current used to exist in the Northern Indian Ocean, when the Caspian and the Aral Seas joined up with certain large Asian lakes to form a single uniform expanse of water. At the spot indicated on the world map, one of these seagoing rivers was rolling by. The Kuroshio of the Japanese, the Black Current, heated by perpendicular rays from the tropical sun. It leaves the Bay of Bengal, crosses the Strait of Malacca, goes up the shores of Asia, and curves onto the North Pacific as far as the Aleutian Islands, carrying along trunks of camphor trees and other local items, the pure indigo of its warm waters sharply contrasting with the ocean's waves. It was this current the Nautilus was about to cross. I watched it on the map with my eyes. I saw it lose itself in the immenseness of the Pacific. I felt myself swept along with it, when Ned Land and Council appeared in the lounge doorway. My 2 gallant companions stood petrified at the sight of the wonders on the display. "Where are we?" the Canadian exclaimed. "In the Quebec Museum?" "Begging master's pardon," Council answered, "but this seems more like the Sommerard Artifacts expedition." My friends, I replied, signaling them to enter. You're neither Canada nor France, but securely aboard the Nautilus, 50 meters below sea level. If Master says so, then so it be it, Council answered. But in all honesty, this lounge is enough to astonish even someone Flemish like myself. Indulge your astonishment, my friend, and have a look, because there's plenty of work here for a classifier of your talents. Council indeed needed no encouragement. Bending over the glass cases, the gallant lad was already muttering choice words from the naturalist vocabulary. Gastropoda, family Buncidia, genus Cowrie, species Cyperia Madagascarius, etc. Meanwhile, Ned Land, less dedicated to conchology, questioned me about my interview with Captain Nemo. Had I discovered who he was, where he came from, where he was heading, how deep he was taking us? In short, 1,000 questions I had no time to answer. I told him everything I knew, or rather everything I didn't know, and I asked him what he had seen or heard on his part. Haven't seen or heard a thing, the Canadian replied. I haven't even spotted the crew of this boat. By any chance, could they be electric too? Electric? Oh, ye gods, I'm half tempted to believe it. But back to you, Professor Arnox, Ned Land said, still hanging on to his ideas. Can't you tell me how many men are on board? 10, 50, 20, 50, 100? I'm unable to answer you, Mr. Land. And trust me on this, for the time being, get rid of these notions of taking over the Nautilus or escaping from it. This boat is a masterpiece of modern technology, and I'd be sorry to have missed it. Many people would welcome the circumstances that have been handed us just to walk into the midst of these wonders. So keep calm, and let's see what's happening around us. See? The harpooner exclaimed. There's nothing to see. Nothing we'll ever see from this sheet iron prison. We're simply running around blindfolded. Ned Land was just pronouncing these last words when we were suddenly plunged into darkness. Utter darkness. The ceiling lights went out so quickly, my eyes literally ached, just as if we had experienced the opposite sensation of going from the deepest gloom to the brightest sunlight. Got some chores to do, I'll have you on in the background. Okay, Skelly, enjoy your chores. We stood stock still, not knowing what surprise was waiting for us, whether pleasant or unpleasant. But a sliding sound became audible. You could tell that some panels were shifting over the Nautilus sides. It's the beginning of the end, Ned Land said. Order Hydromedusa, Council muttered. Perfect choice, Skelly. This is the most calming reading I know. Aww. Suddenly, through 2 oblong openings, daylight appeared on both sides of the lounge. The liquid masses came into view, brightly lit by the ship's electric outpourings. We were separated from the sea by 2 planes of glass. Initially, I shuddered at the thought that these fragile partitions could break, but strong copper bands secured them, giving them nearly infinite resistance. The sea was clearly visible for a 1-mile radius around the Nautilus. What a sight! What pen could describe it? Who could portray the effects of this light through these translucent sheets of water, the subtlety of its progressive shadings in the ocean's upper and lower strata? The transparency of salt water had long been recognized. Its charity is believed to exceed that of spring water. The mineral and organic substances it holds in suspension actually increase its translucency. In certain parts of the Caribbean Sea, you can see the sandy bottom with startling distinctness as deep as 145 meters down, and the penetrating power of the sun's rays seemed to give out only at a depth of 300 meters. But in this fluid setting traveled by the Nautilus, our electric glow was being generated in the very heart of the waves. It was no longer illuminated water, it was light, liquid light. If we accepted the hypotheses of the microbiologist Ehrenberg, who believed that these underwater depths are lit up by the phosphorescent organisms. Nature was certainly saved one of her most prodigious sights for residents of the sea, and I could judge for myself from the thousandfold play of the light. On both sides I had windows opening over these unexplored depths. The darkness in the lounge enhanced the brightness outside, and we stared as if this clear glass were the window of an immense aquarium. The Nautilus seemed to be standing still. This was due to the lack of landmarks, but streaks of water, parted by the ship's spur, sometimes started before our eyes with extraordinary speed. In wonderment, we leaned on our elbows before these show windows, and our stunned silence remained unbroken until Council said, "You wanted to see something, Ned, my friend. Well, now you have something to see." "How unusual," the Canadian put in, setting aside his tantrums and getaway schemes while submitting to the irresistible allure. "A man could go an even greater distance just to stare at such a sight." "Ah," I exclaimed. "I see our captain's way of life. He found himself a separate world that saves its most astonishing wonders just for him." "But where are the fish?" the Canadian ventured to observe. "I don't see any fish." "Why would you care, Ned, my friend?" Council replied, "since you have no knowledge of them." "Me? A fisherman?" Ned Land exclaimed. And on this subject a dispute arose between the two friends, since both were knowledgeable about fish, but from totally different standpoints. Everyone knows that fish make up the fourth and last class in the vertebrate branch. They have been quite aptly defined as cold-blooded vertebrates with a double circulatory system, breathing through gills and designed to live in water. They consist of two distinct series. The series of bony fish, in other words, those whose spines have vertebrae made of bone, and cartilaginous fish, in other words, those whose spines have vertebrae made of cartilage. Possibly the Canadian was familiar with this distinction, but Council knew far more about it, and since he and Ned were now fast friends, he just had to show off. So he told the harpooner, "Ned, my friend, you're a slayer of fish, a highly skilled fisherman. You've caught a large number of these fascinating animals, but I'll bet you don't know how they're classified." "Sure I do," the harpooner replied in all seriousness. "They're classified into fish we eat and fish we don't eat." "Spoken like a true glutton," Council replied. "But tell me, are you familiar with the differences between bony fish and cartilagenic fish?" "Just maybe, Council." "And how about the subdivisions between these two larger classes?" "I haven't the foggiest notion," the Canadian replied. "All right, listen and learn, Ned, my friend. Bony fish are subdivided into 6 orders. Primo, the acanthoprodigians, whose upper jaw is fully formed and free-moving, and those quills have the shape of a cone. This order consists of 15 families, in other words, 3/4 of all known fish. Example, the common perch." "Pretty fair eating," Ned Land replied. "Secundo," Council went on, "the abdominals, whose pelvic fins hang under the abdomen to the rear of the pectorals but aren't attached to the shoulder bone. Any order that's divided into 5 families and make up the great majority of freshwater fish. Examples, carp, pike." "Ugh," the Canadian put in with distinct scorn. "You can keep the freshwater fish." "Tracio," Council said. "The subbrachians, whose pelvic fins are attached under the pectorals and hang directly into the shoulder bone. This order contains 4 families. Examples, flatfish such as a sole, turbot, dab, pallis, brill, etc." "Excellent, really excellent," the harpooner exclaimed, interested in fish only from an edible viewpoint. "Quattro," Council went on, unabashed. "The apods, with long bodies that lack pelvic fins and are covered by a heavy, often tedious skin, an order consisting of only 1 family. Example, common eels and electric eels. So-so, just so-so, Ned Land replied. Quinto, Council said. The Lopobranchians, which have fully formed, free-moving jaws, but whose gills consist of little tufts arranged in pairs along their gill arches. This order includes only one family. Examples: seahorses and dragonfish. Bad, very bad, the harpooner replied. Sexto and last, Council said. The plectogants, whose maxillary bone is firmly attached to the side of their intermaxillary that forms the jaw, and whose plate arch is locked to the skull by sutures that render the jaw immovable, an order lacking true pelvic fins, and which consists of two families. Example: puffers and moonfish. They're an insult to a frying pan, the Canadian exclaimed. Are you grasping all this, Ned, my friend? Said the scholarly council. Not a lick of it, Council, my friend, the harpooner replied. But keep going, because you fill me with fascination. As for cartilaginous fish, Council went on unflappably, they consist of only 3 orders. Good news, Ned put in. Primo, the cyclotomes, whose jaws are fused into a flexible ring and whose gill openings are simply a large number of holes, an order consisting of only one family. Example, the lamprey. An acquired taste, Ned Land replied. Second, though, the ciliations, with gills resembling those of the cyclotomes, but whose lower jaw is free-moving. This order, which is the most important in the class, consists of 2 families. Examples, the ray and the shark. What? Ned Land replied. Rays and man-eaters are in the same order? Well, Council, my friend, on behalf of the rays, I wouldn't advise you to put them in the same fish tank. Thirtio, the Council replied. The Sturonians, whose gill opening is the usual single slit adorned with the gill cover, an order consisting of 4 genera. Example, the sturgeon. Ah, Council, my friend, you saved the best for last, in my opinion, anyhow. And that's all of them? Yes, my gallant Ned, Council replied. And note well, even when one has grasped all of this, one still knows next to nothing, because these families are subdivided into genera, subgenera, species, varieties. All right, Council, my friend, the harpooner said, leaning towards the glass panel. Here comes a couple of your varieties now. Yes, fish, Council explained. One would think he was in front of an aquarium. No, I replied, because an aquarium is nothing more than a cage, and these fish are free as birds in the air. Well, Council, my friend, identify them! Start naming them! Ned Land exclaimed. Me? Council replied. I am unable to. That's my employer's bailiwick. And in truth, although the fine lad was a classifying maniac, he was no naturalist. I doubt that he could tell a bonito from a tuna. In short, he was the exact opposite of the Canadian, who knew nothing about classification but could instantly name any fish. Fish! A triggerfish, I said. It's a Chinese triggerfish, Ned Land replied. Genus Baliste, family Cycloderma, order Pectologanthia, Council muttered. Assuredly, Ned and Council in combination added up to one outstanding naturalist. The Canadian was not mistaken. Cavorting around the Nautilus was a school of triggerfish with flat bodies, grainy skin, armed with stings on their dorsal fins, and with 4 prickly rows of quills quivering on both sides of their tails. Nothing could have been more wonderful than the skin covering them. White underneath, gray above, with spots of gold sparkling in the dark eddies of the waves. Around them, rays were undulating like sheets flapping in the wind, and among these I spotted, much to my glee, a Chinese ray, yellowish on its top side, a dainty pink on its belly, armed with 3 stings behind its eyes, a rare species whose very existence was still doubted in Lancipedes day, since that pioneering classifier of fish had seen only one in a portfolio of Japanese drawings. For 2 hours, a whole aquatic army escorted the Nautilus. In the midst of their leaping and covering, while they competed with each other in beauty, radiance, and speed, I could distinguish some green wrestle, bewhiskered mullet marked with pairs of black lines, white gobies from the genus Electoris, with curved hollow fins and violet spots on the back, wonderful Japanese mackerel from the genus Subcomber with blue bodies and silver heads, glittering azure goldfish whose names by itself gives their full description, several varieties of progy and gilthead, some banded gilthead with fins variously blue and yellow, some with horizontal heraldic bars and enhanced by the black strip around their caudal area, some with color zones and elegantly corseted in their 6 waistbands. Trumpetfish with flute-like beaks that looked like genuine seafaring woodcocks and were sometimes a meter long. Japanese salamanders, serpentine moray eels from the genus is that really what it says? Echidna, that were 6 feet long with sharp little eyes and a huge mouth bristling with teeth, etc. Our wonderment stayed at an all-time feverish pitch. Our exclamations were endless. Ned identified the fish, Council classified them, and as for me, I was in ecstasy over the verve of their movements and the beauty of their forms. Never before had I been given the chance to glimpse these animals alive and at large in their native element. Given such a complete collection from the seas of Japan and China, I won't mention every variety that passed before our dazzled eyes. More numerous than birds in the air, these fish raced right up to us, no doubt attracted by the brilliant glow of our electric beacon. Suddenly, daylight appeared in the lounge. The sheet iron panels slid shut. The magical vision disappeared. But for a good while, I kept dreaming away until the moment my eyes focused on the instruments hanging on the wall. The compass still showed our heading as northeast. The pressure gauge indicated a pressure of 5 atmospheres, corresponding to a depth of 50 meters, and the electric log gave our speed of 15 miles per hour. I waited for Captain Nemo, but he didn't appear. The clock marked the hour of 5. Ned Land and Council returned to their cabin. As for me, I repaired to my stateroom. There I found dinner ready for me. It consisted of turtle soup made from the daintiest hawksbill, a red mullet with white, slightly flaky flesh, whose liver, which when separately prepared, makes a delicious eating, plus loin of imperial anglefish, whose flavor struck me as even better than salmon. I spent the evening in reading, writing, and thinking. Then drowsiness overtook me. I stretched out on my eelgrass mattress, and I fell into a deep slumber, while the Nautilus glided through the swiftly flowing black current. End of chapter. That was a lot of fish. Chapter 15. An Invitation in Writing. The next day, November 9th, I woke up only after a long 12-hour slumber. Council, a creature of habit, came to ask how Master's night went, and to offer his services. He had left his Canadian friend sleeping like a man who had never done anything else. Do you pronounce it Salmon or Salmon? I go both. Depends on the words that were in front of it, usually. Sometimes I'd say I go one, but I can think of times I've said the other way, so both. I let the gallant lad babble as he pleased, without giving him much in the way of a reply. I was concerned about Captain Nemo's absence during our session the previous afternoon, and I had hoped to see him again today. Soon I had put on my clothes, which were woven from strands of seashell tissue. More than once their composition provoked comments from counsel. I informed him that they were made from the smooth, silken filaments with which the fan mollusk, a type of seashell quite abundant along the Mediterranean beaches, attached itself to rocks. In olden times, fine fabric, stocking, and gloves were made from such filaments, because they were both very soft and very warm. So the Nautilus's crew could dress themselves at little cost without needing a thing from cotton growers, sheep, or silkworms on shore. As soon as I was dressed, I made my way to the main lounge. It was deserted. I dove into the study, and the conchological treasures amassed inside the glass cases. I also investigated the huge plant albums that were filled with the rarest marine herbs, which, although they were pressed and dried, still kept their wonderful colors. Among these valuable water plants, I noted various seaweed. Some Caldostephus venticilatris, peacock's tails, fig-leaf calipra, grain-bearing beauty bushes, delicate rose-tangle tinted scarlet, sea colander arranged into fan shapes, mermaid cups that looked like the caps of squat mushrooms and for years have been classified among the zoophytes. In short, a complete series of algae. The entire day passed without my being honored by a visit from Captain Nemo. The panels in the lounge didn't open. Perhaps they didn't want us to get tired of these beautiful things. The Nautilus kept at an east-northeast heading, a speed of 12 miles per hour, and a depth between 50 and 60 meters. Next day, November 10th, the same neglect, the same solitude. I didn't see a soul from the crew. Ned and Council spent the better part of the day with me. They were astonished at the captain's inexplicable absence. Was this eccentric man ill? Did he want to change his plans concerning us? But after all, as Council noted, we enjoyed complete freedom. We were daintily and abundantly fed. Our host had kept to the terms of his agreement. We couldn't complain, and moreover, the very uniqueness of our situation had such generous rewards in store for us. We had no grounds for criticism. That day I started my diary of these adventures, which has enabled me to narrate them with the most scrupulous accuracy. And one odd detail, I wrote on a paper manufactured from marine eelgrass. Early in the morning on November 11th, fresh air poured through the Nautilus's interior, informing me that we had returned to the surface of the ocean to renew our oxygen supply. I headed for the central companionway and climbed onto the platform. At 6 o'clock, I found the weather overcast, the sea gray but calm, hardly a billow. I hoped to encounter Captain Nemo there. Would he come? I only saw the helmsman imprisoned in his glass-windowed pilot house, seated on the ledge furnished by the hull of the skiff. I inhaled the sea's salty aroma with great pleasure. Little by little, the mists were dispersed among the action of the sun's rays. The radiant orb cleared the eastern horizon. Under its gaze, the sea caught on fire like a trail of gunpowder. Scattered on high, the clouds were colored in bright, wonderful shaded hues, and numerous ladyfingers warmed of day-long winds. But what were mere winds to this Nautilus, which no storms could intimidate? So I was maneuvering in this delightful sunrise, so life-giving and cheerful, when I heard someone climbing onto the platform. I was prepared to greet Captain Nemo, but it was his chief officer who appeared, whom I had already met during our first visit with the captain. He advanced over the platform, not seeming to notice my presence. A powerful spyglass in his eye, he scrutinized every point of the horizon with the utmost care. Then, his examination over, he approached the hatch and pronounced a phrase whose exact wording follows below. I remember it because every morning it was repeated under the same circumstances. It ran like this. Nautron rospok lir lorni virt. What it meant I was unable to say. These words pronounced, the chief officer went below again. I thought the Nautilus was about to resume its underwater navigation, so I went down the hatch and back through the gangways to my stateroom. 5 days passed in this way with no change in our situation. Every morning I climbed onto the platform. The same phrase was pronounced by the same individual. Captain Nemo did not appear. I was pursuing the policy that we had seen the last of him, when on November 16th, when re-entering my stateroom with Ned and Council, I found a note addressed to me on the table. I opened it impatiently. It was written in a script that was clear and neat, but a bit Old English in style, its characters reminding me of German calligraphy. The note was worded as follows. Dude is speaking Elvish, yeah. The note was worded as follows. Professor Arnox aboard the Nautilus, November 16th, 1867. Captain Nemo invites Professor Arnox on a hunting trip that will take place tomorrow morning in his Crespo Island fortress. He hopes nothing will prevent the professor from attending, and he looks forward to with pleasure to the professor's companions joining him. Captain Nemo, commander of the Nautilus. A hunting trip, Ned exclaimed. And in his forest in the Crespo Island, Nautilus added. But does this mean the old boy's goes ashore? Ed Landing went on. That seems to be the gist of it, I said, rereading the letter. Well, we've got to accept, the Canadian answered. Once we're on solid ground, we'll figure out a course of action. Besides, it wouldn't pain me to eat a couple slices of fresh venison. Without trying to reconcile the contradictions between Captain Nemo's professed horror of continents or islands and his invitation to go hunting in a forest, I was content to reply. First, let's look into this Crespo Island. I consulted the world map. In a latitude 32 degrees 40 north and longitude 167 degrees 50 west, I found an inlet that had been discovered in 1801 by Captain Crespo, which old Spanish charts called Roca de la Planta, in other words, Silver Rock. But we were about 1,800 miles from our starting point, and by a slight change of heading, the Nautilus was bringing us back towards the southeast. I showed my companions a small stray rock in the middle of the North Pacific. If Captain Nemo does sometimes go ashore, I told them. At least he only picks desert islands. Ned Land shook his head without replying. Then he and Council left me. After supper was served me by the mute and motionless steward, I fell asleep, but not without some anxieties. When I woke up the next day, November 17th, I sensed that the Nautilus was completely motionless. I dressed hurriedly and entered the main lounge. Captain Nemo was there waiting for me. He stood up, bowed, and asked if it suited me to come along. Since he made no allusion to his absence the past 8 days, I also refrained from mentioning it, and I simply answered that my companions and I were ready to go with him. Only, sir, I added, I'll take the liberty of addressing a question to you. Address away, Professor Arnox, and if I'm able to answer, I will. Well then, Captain, how is it that you've severed all ties with the shore, yet you own forest on Crespo Island? Professor, the captain answered me, these forests of mine don't bask in the heat and light of the sun. They aren't frequented by lions, tigers, panthers, or other quadrupeds. They're known only to me. They grow only for me. These forests aren't on land. They're actual underwater forests. Underwater forests! I exclaimed. Yes, Professor. And you're offering to take me to them? Precisely. On foot. Without getting your feet wet. While hunting. Rifles in hand. I stared at the Nautilus commander with an air anything but flattering to the man. Assuredly, I said to myself, he's contracted some mental illness. He's had a fit that's lasted 8 days and isn't over it even yet. What a shame! I liked him better eccentric than insane. These thoughts were clearly readable on my face, but Captain Nemo remained content with inviting me to follow him, and I did so like a man resigned to the worst. We arrived at the dining room, where we found breakfast served. "Professor Arnox," the captain told me, "I beg you to share my breakfast without formality. We can chat while we eat. Besides, although I promised you a stroll in my forest, I made no pledge to arrange for encountering a restaurant there. Accordingly, eat your breakfast like a man who'll probably eat dinner only when it's extremely late." I did justice to this meal. It was made up of various fish and some slices of sea cucumber, the praiseworthy zoophyte, all garnished with such highly appetizing seaweed as the Forphia lacinita and the Orlencia primititia. Our beverage consisted of clear water to which, following the captain's example, I added some drops of a fermented liquor extracted from the Kamchatka process from the seaweed known by the name as Bromelia palmantha. At first, Captain Nemo ate without pronouncing a single word. Then he told me, "Professor, when I proposed that you go hunting in my Crespo forest, you thought I was contradicting myself. When I informed you that it was an issue of underwater forests, you thought I'd gone insane. Professor, you must never make snap judgments about your fellow man." "But, Captain, believe me. Kindly listen to me, and you'll see if you have grounds for accusing me of insanity or self-contradiction." I'm all attention. "Professor, you know as well as I do a man can live underwater as long as he carries with him his own oxygen, his own supply of breathable air. For underwater work projects, the workman hears a waterproof suit with his head imprisoned in a metal capsule while he receives air from above by means of force pumps and flow regulators." "That's the standard equipment for a diving suit," I said. "Correct, but under such conditions the man has no freedom. He's attached to a pump that sends him air through an India rubber hose. It's an actual chain that fetters him to the shore. And if we were to be bound in this way to the Nautilus, we couldn't get far either." "Then how do you break free?" I asked. "We use the Rocalrod Benyarosi device, invented by two of your fellow countrymen but refined by me for my own special uses, thereby enabling you to risk these new physiological conditions without suffering any organic disorders. It consists of a tank built from heavy sheet iron in which I store air under a pressure of 50 atmospheres. This tank is fastened to the back by means of straps, like a soldier's knapsack. Its top part forms a box where the air is regulated by a bellows mechanism and can be released only at its proper tension. In the Royal Caluro device that has been in general use, 2 Indian rubber hoses leave this box and feed to a kind of tent that imprisons the operator's nose and mouth. One hose is for the entrance of air to be exhaled, the other for the exit of air to be exhaled. The tongue closes off the former or the latter depending on the breather's needs. But in my case, since I face considerable pressure at the bottom of the sea, I need to enclose my head in a proper sphere, like those found on standard diving suits, and the 2 hoses for inhalation and exhalation now feed into that sphere. "That's perfect, Captain Nemo, but the air you carry must be quickly depleted. Once it contains no more than 15% oxygen, it becomes unfit for breathing." "Surely, but as I told you, Professor Arnox, the Nautilus pumps enable me to store air under considerable pressure, and given these circumstances, the tank on my diving equipment can supply breathable air for 9 or 10 hours. "I've no more objections to raise," I replied. "I'll only ask you, Captain, how can you light your way at the bottom of the ocean?" "With the Rumkopf device, Professor Arnox. If the first is carried on the back, the second is fastened to the belt. It consists of a Bunsen battery, and I activate not with potassium dirochmate, but with sodium. An induction coil gathers the electricity generated and directs it to a specially designed lantern. In this lantern, one finds a glass spiral that contains only a residue of carbon dioxide glass. When the device is operating, this gas becomes luminous and gives off a continuous whitish light. Thus provided for, I breathe and I see. Captain Nemo, to my every objection you give such crushing answers. I'm afraid to entertain a single doubt. However, though I have no choice but to accept both the Royal and Romkov devices, I'd like to register some reservations about the rifle with which you'll equip me. But it isn't a rifle that uses gunpowder, the captain replied. Then it's an air gun? Surely, how can I make gunpowder in my ship when I have no saltpeter, no sulfur or charcoal? Even so, I replied, to fire underwater in a medium that's 855 times denser than air, you'd have to overcome considerable resistance. That doesn't necessarily follow. There are certain Futon-style guns perfected by the Englishman Philippe Coles and Burley, the Frenchman Flarcy, and the Italian Landi. They're equipped with a special system of airtight fastenings and can fire in underwater conditions. But I repeat, having no gunpowder, I've replaced it with an air at high pressure, which is abundantly supplied me by the Nautilus's pumps. But this air must be swiftly depleted. Well, in a pinch, can't my Quail tank supply me with more? All I have to do is draw it from an ad hoc spigot. Besides, Professor Arnox, you'll see for yourself that during these underwater hunting trips, we make no great expenditure of either air or bullets. But it seems to me that in this semi-darkness, amid this liquid that's so dense in comparison to the atmosphere, a gunshot couldn't carry far and would prove fatal only with difficulty. On the contrary, sir, with this rifle, every shot is fatal, and as soon as the animal's hit, no matter how lightly, it falls as if struck by lightning. Why? Because this rifle doesn't shoot ordinary bullets, but little glass capsules invented by the Austrian chemist Lene Borik, and I have a considerable supply of them. These glass capsules are covered with a strip of steel and weighted with a lead base. They're genuine little Leyden jars charged with a high-voltage electricity. They go off in a single impact, and the animal, no matter how strong, drops dead. I might add that these capsules are no bigger than number 4 shot, and the chamber of any ordinary rifle could hold 10 of them. I'll quit debating, I replied, getting up from my table, and all that's left for me to shoulder my rifle. So where you go, I'll go. Captain Nemo led me to the Nautilus stern, and passing by Ned and Council's cabins, I summoned my 2 companions, who instantly followed us. Then we arrived at a cell located within easy access of the engine room. In this cell, we were to get dressed for our stroll. End of chapter. Books are underrated. I agree. Welcome to the stream. I hope you're doing well today. It works because science, yes. And Jules Verne is more than willing to tell you this science. He is here for it. And I kind of adore it. I love that Jules Verne is just so smart, man. He's just so smart. Like, dang. Alright. Chapter 16. Strolling the Plains. This cell, properly speaking, was the Nautilus' arsenal and wardrobe. Hanging from its walls, a dozen diving outfits were waiting for anybody who wanted to take a stroll. After seeing these, Ned Land exhibited an obvious distaste for the idea of putting one on. But my gallant Ned, I told him, the forests of Crespo Island are simply underwater forests. Oh, great, put in the disappointed harpooner, watching his dreams of fresh meat fade away. And you, Professor Arnox, are going to stick yourself inside these clothes? It has to be, Mr. Ned. Have it your way, sir, the harpooner replied, shrugging his shoulders. But speaking for myself, I'll never get into these things unless they force me. No one will force you, Mr. Land, Captain Nemo said. And is Council going to risk it? Ned replied. And Ned asked, where Master goes, I go, Council replied. At the captain's summons, 2 crewmates came to help us put on these heavy, waterproof clothes made from seamless India rubber and expressly designed to bear considerable pressures. They were like suits of armor that were both yielding and resistant, you might say. These clothes consisted of jacket and pants. The pants ended in bulky footwear adorned with heavy lead shoe soles. The fabric of the jacket was reinforced with copper mail that shielded the chest, protected it from the water's pressure, and allowed the lungs to function freely. The sleeves ended in supple gloves that didn't impede hand movement. These perfected diving suits, it was easy to see, were a far cry from such misshapen costumes as the cork breastplates, leather jumpers, seagoing tunics, barrel helmets, etc., invented and acclaimed in the 18th century. Council and I were soon dressed in these diving suits, as were Captain Nemo and one of his companions, a Herculean type who must have been prodigiously strong. All that remained was to encase one's head in its metal sphere. But before proceeding with this operation, I asked the captain for permission to examine the rifles set aside for us. One of the Nautilus men presented me with a streamlined rifle whose butt was boilerplate steel, hollow inside and of a fairly large dimensions. This served as a tank for the compressed air with a trigger-operated valve that could release into a metal chamber. In a groove where the butt was heaviest, a carriage clip held some 20 electric bullets that, by means of a spring, automatically took their plates into the barrel of the rifle. As soon as one shot had been fired, another was ready to go off. Captain Nemo, I said, this is an ideal, easy-to-use weapon. I ask only to put it to the test, but how will we reach the bottom of the sea? Right now, Professor. The Nautilus is aground in 10 meters of water, and we've only to depart. But how will we set out? You'll see. Captain Nemo inserted his cranium into its spherical headgear. Council and I did the same, but not without hearing the Canadian toss us a sarcastic, "Happy hunting!" On top, the suit ended in a collar of threaded copper, onto which the metal helmet was screwed. 3 holes protected by heavy glass allowed us to see in any direction with simply a turn of the head inside the sphere. Placed on our backs, the recoil device went into operation as soon as it was in position, and for my part, I could breathe with ease. The Ruhmkorff lamp hanging from my belt, my rifle in hand, I was ready to go forth. But in all honesty, while imprisoned in these heavy loads and nailed to the deck by my lead soles, it was impossible for me to take a single step. But this circumstance had been foreseen, because I felt myself propelled into a little room adjoining the wardrobe. Towed in the same way, my companions went with me. I heard a door with watertight seal close after us, and we were surrounded by profound darkness. After some minutes, a sharp hissing reached my ears. I felt a distinct sensation of cold rising from my feet to my chest. Apparently, a stock cop inside the boat was letting in water from outside, which overran us and soon filled up the room. Contrived in the Nautilus side, a second door was then opened. We were lit by a subdued light. An instant later, our feet were treading the bottom of the sea. The reading screen is adorable. Thank you. The long name of some dude from a few decades ago device. They're the I like saying the Ruhmkorff device, but I'm struggling with the other one. Like, this is the Ruhmkorff, and the other one is Becquerel, which is French, and I have no idea. And I know you're not gonna have any better idea, Skelly, but that's what I'm looking at. So we read the voice. We'll go with it, yeah. Alright, And now, how can I convey the impressions left on me by the stroll under the waters? Words are powerless to describe such wonders. When even the painter's brush can't depict the effects unique to the liquid element, how can the writer's pen hope to reproduce them? Captain Nemo walked in front, and his companion followed us a few steps to the rear. Council and I stayed next to each other, as if daydreaming that through our metal carapaces, a little polite conversation might still be possible. Already I no longer felt the bulkiness of my clothes, footwear, and air tank, nor the weight of the heavy sphere inside which my head was rattling like an almond in its shell. Once immersed in water, all these objects lost a part of their weight equal to the weight of the liquid they displaced, and thanks to this law of physics discovered by Archimedes, I did just fine. I was no longer an inert mass, and I had, comparatively speaking, great freedom of movement. Lighting up the sea floor even 30 feet beneath the surface of the ocean, the sun astonished me with its power. The solar rays easily crossed this aqueous mass and dispersed its dark colors. I could easily distinguish 100 meters away, distinguish objects 100 meters away. Farther on, the bottom was tinted with fine shades of ultramarine. Then, off in the distance, it turned blue and faded into a mist of hazy darkness. Truly, this water surrounding me was just a kind of air, denser than the atmosphere on land, but almost as transparent. Above me, I could see the calm surface of the ocean. We were walking on sand that was fine-grained and smooth, not wrinkled like beach sand, which preserves the impressions left by the waves. This dazzling carpet was a real mirror, throwing back the sun's rays with startling intensity. The outcome? An immense vista of reflections that penetrated every liquid molecule. Will anyone believe me if I assert that at this 30-foot depth, I could see as if it was broad daylight? For a quarter of an hour, I trod this blazing sand, which was strewn by tiny crumbs of seashell. Looming like a long reef, the Nautilus' hull disappeared little by little, but when night fell into the midst of the water, the ship's beacon would surely felicitate our return on the board, since its rays carried with perfect distinctness. This effect is difficult to understand for anyone who has never seen light beams so sharply defined on shore. There, the dust that saturates the air given such rays the appearance of a luminous fog. But above water as well as underwater, shafts of electric light were transmitted with incomparable clarity. Meanwhile, we went ever onward, and these vast plains of sand seemed endless. My hands parted liquid curtains that closed again behind me, and my footprints faded swiftly under the water's pressure. Soon, scarcely blurred by their distance from us, the forms of some objects took shape before my eyes. I recognized the lower slopes of some magnificent rocks carpeted by the finest zoophyte specimens, and right off, I was struck by an effect unique to this medium. By then it was 10 o'clock in the morning. The sun's rays hit the surface of the waves at a fairly oblique angle, decomposing by refraction as though passing through a prism. And when this light came into contact with flowers, rocks, spuds, seashells, and polyps, the edges of these objects were shaded with all 7 hues of the solar spectrum. This riot of rainbow tints was a wonder, a feast for the eyes, a genuine kaleidoscope of red, green, yellow, orange, violet, indigo, and blue. In short, the whole palette of a color-happy painter. If only I had been able to share with Council the intense sensations rising in my brain, competing with him in explanations of wonderment. If only I had known, like Captain Nemo and his companion, how to exchange thoughts by means of prearranged signals. So, for lack of anything better, I talked to myself. I declaimed inside this copper box that topped my head, spending more air on empty words than was perhaps advisable. Council, like me, had stopped before this splendid sight, oblivious, obviously, in the presence of these zoophytes and mollusk specimens. The flying man was classifying his head off. Polyps and echinoderms abounded on the seafloor. Various Isaacs coral, cornelium coral living in isolation, tufts of virginal genus Eucliana, formerly known by the name white coral, prickly fungus coral in the shape of mushrooms, sea anemones holding on by their mollusk discs, providing a literal flower bed adorned by jellyfish from the genus Propita wearing collars of azure tentacles, and starfish that spangled the sand, including the vein-like feather stars from the genus Asterophantrum that were like fine lace embroidered by the hand of water nymphs, their festoons swaying by the faint undulations caused by our walking. It filled me with real chagrin to crush underfoot the gleaming mollusk samples that littered the seafloor by the thousands. Concentric comb shells, hammer shells, conquina, seashells that actually hop around, top shell snails, red helmet shells, ankle-wing conchs, red sea hares, and so many other exhibits from this inexhaustible ocean. But we had to keep walking, and we went forward while overhead there scudded schools of Portuguese men of war that let their ultramarine tentacles drift in their wakes. Medusas whose silky white or fine dainty pink parasols were festooned with azure tassels and shaded us from the sun's rays, plus jellyfish of the species Pelagia panophia that, in the dark, would have strewn our path with phosphorescent glivers. All these wonders I glimpsed in the space of a quarter of a mile, barely pausing, following Captain Nemo, whose gesture kept beckoning me onward. Soon the nature of the seafloor changed. The plains of sand were followed by a bed of that viscous slime Americans call ooze, which is composed exclusively of seashells rich in limestone or silica. Then we crossed a prairie of algae, open sea plants that the waters hadn't yet torn loose, whose vegetation grew in wild profusion. Soft to the foot, these densely textured lawns would have rivaled the most luxuriant carpets woven by the hand of man. While these greeneries sprawled under our steps, it didn't neglect us overhead. The surface of the water was crisscrossed by the floating arbor of marine plants belonging to the superabundant algae family that number more than 2,000 known species. I saw long ribbons of fungus drifting above me, some globular, some tubular. Florencia Cladostepius with the slenderest foliage. Rhodmania platata resembling the fan shapes of cactus. I resembled that green-colored plant kept closer to the surface of the sea, while reds occupied a medium depth, which left blacks and browns in charge of designing gardens and flower beds in the ocean's lower strata. These algae are a genuine prodigy of creation, one of the wonders of world flora. This family produces both the biggest and smallest vegetables in the world, because just as 40,000 near invisible buds have been counted in one 5 square millimeter space, so also have fungus plants have been gathered that were over 500 meters long. We had been gone from the Nautilus for about an hour and a half. It was almost noon. I spotted this fact in the perpendicularity of the sun's rays, which were no longer refracted. The magic of these solar colors disappeared little by little, with emeralds and sapphire shades vanishing from our surroundings altogether. We walked with steady steps that rang on the seafloor with astonishing intensity. The tiniest sounds were transmitted with a speed to which the ear is unaccustomed on shore. In fact, water is a better conductor of sound than air, and under the waves noise carries 4 times as fast. Just then, the seafloor began to slope sharply downward. Light took on a uniform hue. We reached a depth of 100 meters, by which point we were undergoing a pressure of 10 atmospheres. But my diving clothes were built along such lines that I never suffered from this pressure. I felt only a certain tightness in my joints of my fingers. Even this discomfort soon disappeared. As for the exhaustion bound to accompany a 2-hour stroll in such unfamiliar trappings, it was nil. Helped by the water, my movements were executed with startling ease. Arriving at this 300-foot drop, I still detected the sun's rays, but just barely. Their intense brilliance had been followed by a reddish twilight, a midpoint between day and night. But we could see well enough to find our way, and it still wasn't necessary to activate the Runkhoff device. Just then, Captain Nemo stopped. He waited until I joined him. Then he pointed a finger at some dark masses outlined in the shadows a short distance away. "It's the forest of Crespo Island," I thought, and I was not mistaken. End of chapter. Reading aloud is harder than doing so in your head. This is true. You kind of have to practice reading aloud. I can't say I've been very good about practicing reading aloud lately, but I'm still doing it. Woo! Alright. Chapter 17. An Underwater Forest. We had finally arrived on the outskirts of this forest, surely one of the finest in Captain Nemo's immense domains. He regarded it as his own and had laid the same claim to it that, in the first days of the world, the first men had to their forests on land. Besides, who else could dispute his ownership of this underwater property? What other, bolder pioneer could come, axe in hand, to clear away its dark underbrush? This forest was made up of big tree-like plants, and when we entered beneath their huge arches, my eyes were instantly struck by the unique arrangement of their branches, an arrangement that I had never before encountered. None of the weeds carpeting the seafloor, none of the branches bristling from the shrubbery, crept or leaned or stretched on a horizontal plane. They all rose right up towards the surface of the ocean. Every filament or ribbon, no matter how thin, stood ramrod straight. Focused plants and creepers were growing in stiff perpendicular lines, governed by the density of the element that generated them. After I parted them with my hands, these otherwise motionless plants would shoot right back to their original position. It was a regime of verticality. I soon grew accustomed to this bizarre arrangement, likewise to the comparative darkness surrounding us. The seafloor in this forest was strewn with sharp chunks of stone that were hard to avoid. Here, the range of underwater flora seemed completely comprehensive to me, as well as more abundant than it might have been in the Arctic or tropical zones, where such exhibits are less common. But for a few minutes, I kept accidentally confusing the two kingdoms, mistaking zoophytes for water plants, animals for vegetables. And who hasn't made the same blunder? Flora and fauna are so closely associated in the underwater world. I observed all that these exhibits from the vegetable kingdom were attracted to the seafloor by only the most makeshift methods. They had no roots and didn't care which solid object secured them, sand, shells, husks, or pebbles. They didn't ask for their hosts for substance, just a point of purchase. These plants are entirely self-propagating, and the principle of their existence lies in the water that sustains and nourishes them. In place of leaves, most of them sprouted blades of unpredictable shape, which were confined to a narrow gambit of colors consisting only of pink, crimson, green, olive, tan, and brown. There I saw again, but not yet pressed and dried like the Nautilus specimens, some peacock's tails spread open like the fan to stir up a cooling breeze, scarlet rose tangle, sea tangles stretching out their youngest and edible roots, twisting strings of kelp like from the genus Neurocistis that bloomed to a height of 15 meters, bouquets of mermaids' cups whose stems grew wider at the top, and a number of other open sea plants, all without flowers. It's an odd anomaly in this bizarre environment, as one nitty naturalist puts it. The animal kingdom blossoms and the vegetable kingdom doesn't. These various types of shrubbery were as big as trees in the temperate zone. In the damp shade between them, there were clustered actual bushes of moving flowers, hedges of zoophytes in which there grew stony coral strips and twisting furrows, yellowish sea anemones from the genus Cheirophylla with translucent tentacles, plus anemone with grassy tufts from the genus Zontharia. And to complete the illusion, minnows flitted from the branches to branch like a swarm of hummingbirds, while there rose underfoot, like a conveyous snipe, yellow fish from the genus Lepizocanthius, with the bristling jaws and sharp scales, flying gurnards and pinecone fish. Near 1 o'clock, Captain Nemo gave the signal to halt. Speaking for myself, I was glad to oblige, and we stretched out beneath an arbor of winged kelp, whose long, thin tendrils stood up like arrows. The short break was a delight. It lacked only the charm of conversation, but it was impossible to speak, impossible to reply. I simply nudged my big copper headpiece against Council's headpiece. I saw a happy gleam in the gallant lad's eyes, and to communicate his pleasure, he jiggled around inside his carapace in the world's silliest way. For a fictional book, this is surprisingly educational. It really is. From my understanding, all of Jules Verne's books are like this, and I want to read them all now. Anyway. Sorry, that was... After 4 hours of strolling, I was quite astonished not to feel any intense hunger. What kept my stomach in such a good mood, I'm unable to say. But in exchange, I experienced that irresistible desire for sleep that comes over every diver. Accordingly, my eyes soon closed behind their heavy glass windows, and I fell into an uncontrollable doze, which until then I had been able to fight off only through the movements of our walking. Captain Nemo and his muscular companion were already stretched out in this clear crystal, setting us a fine nap-time example. You nerd, that's me! How long I was sunk in this torpor I cannot estimate, but when I awoke it seemed as if the sun were setting up toward the horizon. Captain Nemo was already up, and I had started to stretch my limbs, when an unexpected apparition brought me sharply to my feet. A few paces away, a monstrous, meter-high sea spider was staring at me with beady eyes, poised to spring at me. Although my diving suit was heavy enough to protect me from this animal's bites, I couldn't keep back a shudder of horror. Just then Council woke up, together with the Nautilus sailor. Captain Nemo alerted his companion to this hideous crustacean with a swing of the rifle, but quickly brought down, and I watched the monster's horrible legs writhing in dreadful convulsions. This encounter reminded me that other, more daunting animals must be lurking in these dark reaches, and my diving suit might not be adequate protection against their attacks. Such thoughts hadn't previously crossed my mind, and I was determined to keep on my guard. Meanwhile, I had assumed this rest period would be the turning point on our stroll, but I was mistaken. Instead of heading back to the Nautilus, Captain Nemo continued his daring excursion. The sea floor kept sinking, and its significantly steeper slope took us to greater depths. It must have been nearly 3 o'clock when we reached a narrow valley gorged between high, vertical walls and located 150 meters down. Thanks to the perfection of our equipment, we had thus gone 90 meters below the limit that nature had, until then, set on man's underwater excursions. I say 150 meters, although I had no instrument for estimating this distance, but I knew that the sun's rays, even in the clearest seas, could reach no deeper. So at precisely this point, the darkness became profound. Not a single object was visible past 10 paces. Consequently, I had begun to grope my way when I suddenly saw the glow of an intense white light. Captain Nemo had just activated his electric device. His companion did likewise. Council and I followed suit. By turning a switch, I established contact between the induction coil and the glass spiral, and the sea, lit up by 4 lanterns, was illuminated by a radius of 25 meters. Captain Nemo continued to plummet into the dark depths of this forest, whose shrubbery grew even more sparse. I observed that vegetable life was disappearing more quickly than animal life. The open sea plants had already left behind the increasing arid seafloor, where a prodigious number of animals were still swarming. Zoophytes, articulates, mollusks, and fish. While I was walking, I thought the light of our Ronkopf devices would automatically attract some inhabitants of these dark strata. But if they did approach us, at least they kept a distance regrettable from the hunter's standpoint. Several times I saw Captain Nemo stop and take aim with his rifle. Then, after sighting down his barrel for a few seconds, he would straighten up and resume his walk. Finally, at around 4 o'clock, this marvelous excursion came to an end. A wall of superb rocks stood before us, imposing in its sheer mass. A pile of gigantic stone blocks, an enormous granite cliffside pitted with dark caves, but not offering a single gradient we could climb up. This was the underpinning of Crespo Island. This was land. The captain stopped suddenly. A gesture from him brought us to a halt, and however much I wanted to clear this wall, I had to stop. Here ended the domains of Captain Nemo. He had no desire to pass beyond them. Farther on lay a part of the globe he would no longer tread underfoot. Our return journey began. Captain Nemo resumed the lead in our little band, always heading forward without hesitation. I noted that we didn't follow the same path as returning to the Nautilus. This new route, very steep and hence very arduous, quickly took us close to the surface of the sea. But this return to the upper strata wasn't so sudden that decompression took place too quickly, which could have led to serious organic disorders and given us those internal injuries so fatal to divers. With great promptness, the light reappeared and grew stronger, and the refraction of the sun, already too low on the horizon, again ringed the edges of various objects with the entire color spectrum. At a depth of 10 meters, we walked amid a swarm of small fish from every species, more numerous than birds in the air, more agile too. But no aquatic game worthy of a gunshot had yet been offered to our eyes. Just as I saw the captain's weapon spring in his shoulders and track a moving object through the bushes. A shot went off. I heard a faint hissing, and an animal stopped a few paces away, literally struck by lightning. It was a magnificent sea otter from the genus Enhydra, the only exclusively marine quadruped. 1.5 meters long, this otter had to be worth a good high price. Its coat, chestnut brown and silver below, would have made one of those wonderful fur pieces so much in demand in the Russian and Chinese markets. The fineness and luster of its pelt guaranteed that it would go for at least 2,000 euro. I was full of wonderment at this unusual mammal, with its circular head adorned by short ears, its round eyes, its white whiskers like those on a cat, its webbed and clawed feet, its bushy tail. Hunted and trapped by fishermen, this valuable carnivore had become extremely rare, and it takes refuge chiefly in the northernmost parts of the Pacific, where in all likelihood its species will soon be facing extinction. Captain Nemo's companion picked up the animal, loaded it on his shoulder, and we took to the trail again. For an hour, plains of sand unrolled before our steps. Plains of sand unrolled before our steps. Often the seafloor rose to within 2 meters of the surface of the water. I could then see our images clearly mirrored on the underside of the waves, but reflected upside down. Above us there appeared an identical band that duplicated our every movement and gesture. In short, a perfect likeness of the quartet near which it walked, but with heads down and feet in the air. Another unusual effect. Heavy clouds passed above us, forming and fading swiftly. But after thinking it over, I realized these so-called clouds were caused simply by the changing densities of the long ground swells, and I even spotted the foaming whitecaps that their breaking crests were proliferating over the surface of the water. Lastly, I couldn't help seeing the actual shadows of large birds passing over our heads, swiftly skimming the surface of the sea. On this occasion, I witnessed one of the finest gunshots ever to thrill the marrow of a hunter. A large bird with a wide wingspan, quite clearly visible, approached and hovered over us. When it was just a few meters above the waves, Captain Nemo's companion took aim and fired. The animal dropped, electrocuted, and its descent brought it within reach of our ardourite hunter, who promptly took possession of it. It was an albatross of the finest species, a wonderful specimen of these open-sea fowl. This incident did not interrupt our walk. For 2 hours we were sometimes led over plains of sand, sometimes over prairies of seaweed that were quite arduous to cross. In all honesty, I was dead tired by the time I spotted a hazy glow half a mile away, cutting through the darkness of the waters. It was the Nautilus beacon. Within 20 minutes we would be on the board, and I could breathe easy again, because my tank's current air supply seemed to be quite low in oxygen. But I was reckoning without an encounter that slightly delayed our arrival. I was lagging behind some 20 paces when I saw Captain Nemo suddenly come back towards me. With his powerful hands, he sent me buckling to the ground, while his companion did the same to Council. At first I didn't know what to make of this sudden assault, but I was reassured to observe the captain lying motionless beside me. I was stretched out on the seafloor directly beneath some bushes of algae, when I raised my head and spied two enormous masses hurtling by, throwing off phosphorescent glimmers. My blood turned cold in my veins. I saw that we were under threat from a fearsome pair of sharks. They were blue sharks, dreadful man-eaters with enormous tails, dull, glassy stares, and phosphorescent matter oozing from holes around their snouts. They were like monstrous fireflies that could thoroughly pulverize a man in their jaws. I didn't know if Council was busy with their classification, but as for me, I looked at their silver bellies, their fearsome mouths bristling with teeth, from a viewpoint less than scientific, more as a victim than a professor of natural history. Luckily, these voracious animals have poor eyesight. They went by without noticing us, grazing us with their brownish fins, and miraculously, we escaped a danger greater than encountering a tiger deep in the jungle. Half an hour later, guided by its electric trail, we reached the Nautilus. The outside door had been left open, and Captain Nemo closed it after we re-entered the first cell. Then he pressed a button. I heard pumps operating within the ship. I felt the water lowering around me, and in a few moments the cell was completely empty. The inside door opened, and we passed into the wardrobe. There, our diving suits were removed, not without difficulty, and utterly exhausted, faint from lack of food and rest, I repaired to my stateroom, full of wonder at the startling excursion from the bottom of the sea. End of chapter. That was neat. Short. Yes. Short. Yay, short. I apologize, my throat's getting a little bit scratchy, but it's okay. Thank you for the hydrate, Spyro, I really appreciate it, and the stretch. And the snack. How are we all enjoying so far? I know I'm personally really enjoying it. Apparently we're 32% of the way done. Nice and calm. Heck yeah! Glad to hear it. We are almost 2 hours into the stream. Which is always nice. I hope everyone's doing okay. How are we all doing? Very nice. Music is still a bit loud, but other than that, it's good. Okay, I will adjust then. Is that better? Yeah, that's good. It's mainly when it swells when it's loud. Yeah. Hopefully it won't be too loud now, so do tell me if it's still too loud, but we will continue on. Like, a chapter or two more, I think, before I'm gonna have to end the stream. Alright. Chapter 18. 4,000 Leagues Under the Pacific. By the next morning, November 18th, I was fully recovered from my exhaustion of the day before, and I climbed onto the platform just as the Nautilus chief officer was pronouncing his daily phrase. It then occurred to me that these words either referred to the state of the sea, or they meant there's nothing in sight. And in truth, the ocean was deserted, not a sail on the horizon. The tips of the Crespo Island had disappeared during the night. The sea, absorbing every color of the prism except its blue rays, reflected the latter in every direction and sported a wonderful indigo tint. The undulating waves regularly took on the appearance of water silk with wide stripes. I was marveling at this magnificent ocean view when Captain Nemo appeared. He didn't seem to notice my presence and began a series of astronomical observations. Then his observation finished, he went and leaned his elbows on the beacon housing, his eyes straying over the surface of the ocean. Meanwhile, some 20 of the Nautilus sailors, all energetic, well-built fellows, climbed onto the platform. They had come to pull up the nets left in our wake during the night. These seamen obviously belonged to different nationalities, although indications of European physical traits could be seen in all of them. If I'm not mistaken, I recognized some Irishmen, some Frenchmen, a few Slavs, and a native of either Greece or Crete. Even so, these men were frugal of speech and used among themselves only a bizarre dialect whose origin I couldn't even guess, so I had to give up any notion of questioning them. The nets were hauled on board. They were a breed of trawl resembling those used off of Normandy coast, huge pouches left half open by a floating pole and a chain laced through the lower meshes. Trailing in this way from these iron loaf markers, the resulting receptacles scoured the ocean floor and collected every marine exhibit in their path. That day they gathered up some unusual specimens from these fish-filled waterways. Anglerfish whose comical movements qualified them for the epithet clown. Black Commerson's anglers, equipped with their antennas, undulating triggerfish encircled by little red bands, bloated pufferfish whose venom is extremely insidious, some live olive-hued lampreys, snipefish covered with silver scales, cutlass fish whose electrocuting power equals that of the electric eel and the electric ray, scaly featherbacks with brown crosswire bands, greenish codfish, several varieties of goby, etc. Finally, some fish of larger proportions, a 1-meter jack with a prominent head, several fine binto from the genus Scomber decked out in the colors blue and silver, and 3 magnificent tuna whose high speeds couldn't save them from our trawl. I estimate that this cast of the net brought in more than 1,000 pounds of fish. It was a fine catch, but not surprising. In essence, these nets stayed in our wake for several hours, incarcerating an entire aquatic world in a prison made of thread. We were never lacking in provisions of the highest quality, which the Nautilus' speed and the lure of its electric light would continuously replenish. These various exhibits from the sea were immensely lowered down the hatch in the direction of the storage lockers, some to be eaten fresh, others to be preserved. After its fishing was finished and its air supply renewed, I thought the Nautilus would resume its underwater excursion. I was ready to return to my stateroom, when Captain Nemo turned to me, and without further preamble, "Look at this ocean, Professor. Doesn't it have the actual gift of life? Doesn't it experience both anger and affection? Last evening it went to sleep just as we did, and there it is, waking up after a peaceful night." No hellos or good mornings for this gent. You could have thought this eccentric individual was simply continuing a conversation we've already started. "See," he went on, "it's waking up under the sea's caresses. It's going to relive its daily existence. What a fascinating field of study lies in watching the play of its organism. It owns impulsive arteries, it has spasms, and I side with the scholarly Commander Murray, who discovered it has a circulation as real as the circulation of blood in animals." I'm sure that Captain Nemo expected no replies from me, and it seemed pointless to pitch in with, "Ah, yes, exactly," or "How right you are." Rather, he was simply talking to himself with long pauses between sentences. He was meditating out loud. "Yes," he said. "The ocean owns a genuine circulation, and to start its going, the creator of all things has only to increase its heat, salt, and microscopic animal life. In essence, heat creates the different densities that leads to currents and countercurrents. Evaporation, which is nil in the high Arctic regions and very active in equatorial zones, brings about a constant interchange of tropical and polar waters. What's more, I've detected those falling and rising currents to make up the ocean's true breathing. I've seen a molecule of salt water heat up at the surface, sink into the depths, reach a maximum density of -2 degrees centigrade, then cool off, grow lighter, and rise again. At the poles, you'll see the consequences of this phenomenon, and soon this law of far-seeing nature, you'll understand why water can freeze only at the surface." As the captain was finishing his sentence, I said to myself, "The pole! This brazen individual claiming he'll take us even to that location?" Meanwhile, the captain fell silent and stared at the element he had studied so thoroughly and unceasingly. Then, going on, "Salts," he said, "fill the sea in considerable quantities, Professor, and if you remove all its dissolved saline content, you'd create a great mass measuring 4,500,000 cubic leagues, which, if it were spread all over the globe, would form a layer more than 10 meters high. And don't think that the presence of these salts is due merely to some whim of nature. No, they make ocean waters less open to evaporation and prevent winds from carrying off excess amounts of steam, which, when condensing, would submerge the temperate zones. Salts play a leading role, the role of the stabilizer for the general ecology of the globe." My favorite quote so far. Salt. I have to say it is one of mine too. Captain Nemo stopped, straightened up, took a few steps along the platform, and returned to me. "As for those billions of tiny animals," he went on, "those infusoria, infusoria that live by the millions in one droplet of water. 800,000 of them are needed to weigh 1 milligram. Their role is no less important. They absorb the marine salts, they assimilate the solid element in the water, and since they create coral and marefores, they're the true builders of limestone continents. And so, after they've finished depriving our water drop of its mineral nutrients, the droplet gets lighter, rises to the surface, they're absorbed more salts left behind through evaporation, gets heavier, sinks again, and brings those tiny animals new elements to absorb. The outcome? A double current, rising and falling, constant movement, constant life. More intense than on land, more abundant, more infinite. Such life blooms in every part of this ocean. An element fatal to man, they say, but vital to the myriads of animals, and to me. When Captain Nemo spoke in this way, he was transfigured, and he filled me with extraordinary excitement. There, he added, out there lies true existence. And I can imagine the founding of nautical towns, clusters of underwater households that, like the Nautilus, would return to the surface of the sea to breathe each morning. Free towns, if ever there were, independent cities. Then again, who knows whether some tyrant... Captain Nemo finished his sentence with a vehement gesture, then, addressing me directly, as if to dry away an ugly thought. Professor Arnox, he asked me, do you know the depth of the ocean floor? At least, Captain, I know what the major soundings tell us. Could you quote them to me so I can double-check them as the need arises? Here, I replied, are a few of them that stick to my memory. If I'm not mistaken, an average depth of 8,200 meters was found in the North Atlantic, and 2,500 meters in the Mediterranean. The most remarkable soundings were taken in the South Atlantic near the 35th parallel, and they gave 12,000 meters, 14,091 meters, and 15,149 meters. All in all, it's estimated that if the sea bottom were made level, its average depth would be about 7 kilometers. Well, Professor, Captain Nemo replied, we'll show you better than that, I hope. For the average depth of this part of the Pacific, I'll inform you it's a mere 4,000 meters. This said, Captain Nemo headed to the hatch and disappeared down the ladder. I followed him and went back to the main lounge. The propeller was instantly set in motion, and the log gave our speed as 20 miles per hour. Over the ensuing days and weeks, Captain Nemo was very frugal with his visits. I saw him only at rare intervals. His chief officer regularly fixed the position I found reported on the chart, and in such a way that I could exactly plot the Nautilus' course. Council and Land spent long hours with me. Council had told his friend about the wonders of our undersea stroll, and the Canadian was sorry he hadn't gone along. But I hoped an opportunity would arise for us to visit the forests of Oceania. Almost every day, the panels of the lounge were open for some hours, and our eyes never tired of probing the mysteries of the underwater world. The Nautilus' general heading was southeast, and it stayed at a depth between 100 and 550 meters. However, from Lord knows what whim, one day it did a diagonal dive by means of its slanting fins, reaching a strata located 2,000 meters underwater. The thermometer indicated a temperature of 4.25 degrees centigrade, which at this depth seemed to be a temperature common to all latitudes. On November 26, at 3 o'clock in the morning, the Nautilus cleared the tropics of Cancer at longitude 172 degrees. Are you reading a manual? No, I'm reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. This is how he writes. Oh, gotcha, yeah. On the 27th, it passed in sight of the Hawaiian Islands, where the famous Captain Cook met his death on February 14, 1779. By then, it had fared 4,860 leagues from our starting point. When I arrived on the platform that morning, I saw the island of Hawaii 2 miles to leeward. The largest of the 7 islands making up this group. I could clearly distinguish the tilled soil on the outskirts, the various mountain chains running parallel with its coastline, and its volcanoes, crowned by Mauna Kea, whose elevation is 5,000 meters above sea level. Among other specimens from the waterways, our net brought up some peacock-tailed Falbarian coral, polyps fastened into stylish shapes and unique to this part of the ocean. I joined to heat the stove to 250 degrees. I know that's not what you said. In other words, Athena is a nerd. Yes, true. But that is 100% what I heard. Fair. Athena is lovely. Aww. They're the only brain cell of the group. Aww. You guys are all so sweet. The Nautilus kept to its southeasternly heading. On December 1st, it cut the equator at longitude 142 degrees, and on the 4th of the same month, after a quick crossing marked by no incident, we raised the Marquesas Islands. Thank you for the follow, I really appreciate it! 3 miles off, in latitude 8 degrees 57 south, and longitude 139 degrees 32 west, I spotted Martin Point on Nuku'hiva, chief member of this island group that belongs to France. I could make out only its wooded mountains on the horizon, because Captain Nemo hated to hug shore. There, our nets brought up some fine fish samples. Dolphin fish with azure fins, gold tails and flesh that's unrivaled in the entire world. Grass from the genus Hologymnosus that were nearly denuded of scales but exquisite in flavor. Knife jaws with bony beaks. Yellowish albacore that were as tasty as bonito. All fish worth classifying in the ship's pantry. After leaving these delightful islands to the protection of the French flag, the Nautilus covered about 2,000 miles from December 4th to the 11th. Its navigating was marked by an encounter with an immense school of squid, unusual mollusks that are near neighbors of the cuttlefish. French fishermen gave them the name cocklefish. They belonged to the class Cephalopodia. Cephalopodia, there we go. Family Dibranchiata, consisting of themselves greater, together with cuttlefish and argonauts. The naturalist of antiquity made a special study of them, and these animals furnished many rigball figures of speech for soapbox or orators in the Greek marketplace, as well as excellent dishes for the tables of rich citizens, if we're to believe Athenius, a Greek physician predating Galen. I just named him Seth. It was during the night of December 9th to 10th that the Nautilus encountered this army of distinctly nocturnal mollusks. They numbered in the millions. They were migrating from the temperate zone towards zones still warmer, following the itineraries of herrings and sardines. We stared at them through our thick glass windows. They swam backwards with tremendous speed, moving by means of their locomotive tubes, chasing fish and mollusks, eating the little ones, eaten by the big ones, tossing in indescribable confusion the 10 feet that nature had rooted in their heads like a hairpiece of few manic snakes. Despite its speed, the Nautilus navigated for several hours in the midst of the school of animals, and its nets brought up an incalculable number, among which I recognized all 9 species that Professor Orbigneri has classified as native to the Pacific Ocean. During this crossing, the sea continually lavished us with the most marvelous sights. Its variety was infinite. It changed its setting and decor for the mere pleasure of our eyes, and we were called upon not simply to contemplate the works of our Creator in the midst of the liquid element, but also to probe the ocean's most daunting mysteries. During the day of December 11th, I was busy reading in the main lounge. Ned Land and Council were observing the luminous waters through the gaping panels. The Nautilus was motionless. Its ballast tanks full, it was sitting at a depth of 1,000 meters in a comparatively unpopulated region of the ocean, where only larger fish put in occasional presences. Just then I was studying a delightful book by Don Marce, The Servants of the Stomach, and savoring its ingenious teachings, when Council interrupted my reading. "Would Master kindly come here for an instant?" he said to me in an odd voice. "What is it, Council?" "It's something that Master should see." I stood up, leaned on my elbows before the window, and I saw it. In the broad electric daylight, an enormous black mass, quite motionless, hung suspended in the midst of the waters. I observed it carefully, trying to find out the nature of this gigantic cetacean. Then a sudden thought crossed my mind. "A ship!" I exclaimed. "Yeah," the Canadian replied. "A disabled craft that's sinking straight down." Ned Land was not mistaken. We were in the presence of a ship whose severed shrouds still hung from their clasps. Its hull looked in good condition. It must have gone under only a few hours before. The stumps of 3 masts, chopped off 2 feet above the deck, indicated a flooding ship that had been forced to sacrifice its masting. But it had heeled sideways, filling completely, and it was listing to port even yet. A sorry sight, its carcass lost under the waves, but sorrier still was the sight on its deck, where, lashed with ropes to prevent their being washed overboard, some human corpses still lay. I counted 4 of them, 4 men, one still standing at the helm, then a woman halfway out of the skylight on the afterdeck, holding a child in her arms. This woman was young. Under the brilliant lighting of the Nautilus rays, I could make out her features, which the water hadn't yet decomposed. With this supreme effort, she had lifted her child above her head, and the poor little creature's arms were still twined around the mother's neck. The postures of the 4 seamen seemed ghastly to me, twisting with convulsing movement. Yeesh! I need a minute. Okay. The postures of the 4 seamen seemed ghastly to me, twisting from convulsive movements as if making the last effort to break loose from the ropes that bound them to their ship. The helmsman, standing alone, calmer, his face smooth and serious, his grizzled hair plastered to his brow, his hands clutching the wheel, seemed even yet to be guiding his wrecked 3-master through the ocean depths. What a scene. We stood dumbstruck, hearts pounding, before the shipwreck caught in the act, as if it had been photographed in its final moments, so to speak. And already I could see enormous sharks moving in, eyes ablaze, drawn by the lure of human flesh. Meanwhile, turning, the Nautilus made a circle around the sinking ship, and for a moment I could read the board on the stern. The Florida, Sunderland, England. End of chapter. I need a minute. Okay. The Canadian, yes. Ned Land, he's Canadian. All these characters are technically speaking French. I just have an English translation. Because Jules Verne... I know most people consider Mary Shelley the mother of science fiction, but I'm pretty sure Jules Verne stuff is older, and... dude. Oh, yes. Light reading. Yeah, light. I missed the word sandwich yesterday. Why miss it? You can still have it now. Sandwich. This is impressive as hell. Yeah. It really is impressive. You can still have sandwich. Only if I can spell sandwich. Sandwich word sales pitch by... Sandwich word sales pitch by Athena. Dear God, I can? Yes. Have the sandwich. It's yours. Tell me more. Sandwich is good. It makes you go nom nom. And you can have it. And it's a fun word to say. And you should take it. Yes. It is yours, my friend. But only if you have enough rupees. It's free 99 plus shipping and handling. Get your sandwich today. Or you can borrow mine. I lend. Free plus fees. Yeah. It's free 99. I'll let you borrow mine. It's great. Have a sandwich. Alright, I'm all in. Heck yeah! I want to invest. Aw, yeah. And you said even hearing the words sound big, and you are correct. They are big words. A lot of it's Latin. Which means I have to learn more Latin, honestly, to be able to pronounce half this. Eat sandwich. Great, now that you've borrowed it, can I have it back? No. Don't worry. I have a sandwich machine. Created by the sandwich. It makes more sandwiches. It's great. Which is why I'm so willing to share. On which? Alright, like, one more chapter before I have to go ahead and end stream and rest my voice, because I've been reading for basically 2.5 hours. Alright. Chapter 19. Vanikoro. This dreadful sight was the first of a whole series of maritime catastrophes that the Nautilus would encounter on its run. When it plied more heavy travel seas, we often saw wrecked hulls rotting in midwater, and farther down, cannons, shells, anchors, chains, and 1,000 other iron objects rusting away. Meanwhile, continuously swept along by the Nautilus, where we lived in near isolation, we raised the Tuamato Islands on December 11th, that old, dangerous group associated with the French global navigator Commander Bougainville. It stretches from Dues Islands to Lazaref Island over an area of 500 leagues from the southeast to the west-northwest, between latitude 13 degrees 300, not 30, between latitude 13 degrees 30 and 23 degrees 50 south. between longitude 125 degrees 30 and 151 degrees 30 west. This island group covers a massive area of 370 square leagues, and it's made up of some 60 subgroups, among which we noted the Gambier group, which is a French protectorate. These islands are coral formations, thanks to the works of polyps. A slow but steady upheaval will someday connect these islands to each other. Later on, this new island will be fused to its neighboring island groups, and a fifth continent will stretch from New Zealand to New Caledonia as far as the Marquesas Islands. Voltaclet? It was spelt like this. Elliot, you're weird. We're listening to Athena read half French. My grandpa knew Latin. Nice. Going back to the Shadow Realm. Voltaclet. Okay. The day I expounded this theory to Captain Nemo, he answered me coldly. The Earth doesn't need new continent, but new men. Sailor's luck led the Nautilus straight to no, there's so many vowels! Rio Island, one of the most unusual in this group, which was discovered in 1822 by Captain Bell aboard the Minerva. So, Riau? I'm gonna hope it's Riau. Riau Island, one of the most unusual of this group, which was discovered in 1822 by Captain Bell aboard the Minerva. So I was able to study the metamorphoric process that has created the islands in this ocean. Maybe Lake Rio, maybe. Metaphors, which one must guard against the confusing with precious coral, clothe their tissue in a limestone crust, and their variations in structure have led my famous mentor, Professor Mylene Edwards, to classify them into 5 divisions. The tiny microscopic animals that secrete their polyparae live in the billions in the depths of their cells. Their limestone deposits build up into rocks, reefs, inlets, islands. In some places they form atolls, a circular ring surrounding a lagoon or small inner lake that gaps place in contact with the sea. Elsewhere they may take the shape of barrier reefs, such as those that exist along the coasts of New Caledonia and several of the Tuamotu Islands. And still other locations, such as Reunion Island and the islands of Mauritius, they build fringing reefs, high, straight walls next to which the ocean's depth is considerable. People wonder why I fail English while this book exists. Yes. Nope. It's Violu. Okay. Marisa. While cruising along only a few cable lengths from the underpinnings of Riul Island, I marveled at the gigantic piece of work accomplished by these microscopic laborers. These walls were the express achievements of madrepores, known by the names fire coals, finger coral, star coral, and stony coral. These polyps grow exclusively in the agitated strata of the surface of the sea, and so it's in the upper reaches that they begin these structures, which sink little by little together with the secreted rubble binding them. This, at least, is the theory of Mr. Charles Darwin, who thus explains the formation of atolls, a theory superior, in my view, to the one that says these madreporic edifices sit on the summits of mountains or volcanoes submerged a few feet below sea level. Right along with YOLO Seth Fish. Why can't we just read picture books? Too smooth brain is. Eyes, brain smooth. No pictures. I have. Not a lot of picture books are in public domain yet. Wait. Wait like 50 years. Then we can. Then we'll read like The Very Hungry Caterpillar or something. I could observe. Wait, where am I? I missed my spot. Athena, have you seen Valid to Bite Fingers yet? I've seen you say Valid to Bite Fingers. Right, where was I? I was. Because that's one hell of a picture book. Oh. I could observe these strange walls quite closely. Our surrounding lines indicated that they dropped perpendicularly to more than 300 meters, and our electric beams made the bright limestone positively sparkle. In reply to a question Council asked me about the growth rate of these colossal barriers, I thoroughly amazed him by saying that scientists put it to 1/8 of an inch per biennium. Therefore, he said to me, to build these walls it took 129,000 years, my gallant counsel, which significantly extends the biblical days of creation. What's more, the formation of coal, in other words, the petrification of forests swallowed by floods, and the cooling of basalt rocks otherwise call for a much longer period of time. I might add that those days in the Bible must represent whole epochs and not literally the lapse of time between two sunrises, because according to the Bible itself, the sun doesn't date from the first day of creation. Wow, okay. I mean, I knew that, but I wasn't expecting it to come up. When the Nautilus returned to the surface of the ocean, I could take in Real Island over its whole flat, wooded expanse. Obviously, its metamorphic rocks have been made fertile by tornadoes and thunderstorms. One day, carried off by a hurricane from neighboring shores, some seed fell into these limestone beds, mixing with decomposed particles of fish and marine plants to form vegetable humus. Propelled by the waves, a coconut arrived on this new coast. Its germ took root. Its trees grew tall, catching steam off the water. A brook was born. Little by little, vegetation spread. Tiny animals, worms, insects rode ashore on tree trunks snatched from islands to windward. Turtles came to lay their eggs. Birds rested in young trees. In this way, animal life developed. And drawn by the greenery and fertile soil, man appeared. And that's how these islands were formed, the immense achievement of microscopic animals. Biblical lore and science lore, yeah. Started with really deep sea fish, and now it's going, Jesus Christ, right? Yeah. And it's just going to keep undulating between these two, I think. Near evening, Real Island melted into the distance, and the Nautilus notably changed course. Jesus fish. Sorry. I'm tired. Okay. Jesus can walk on water, but can he swim on land? The holy grass. Okay. Whew. Near evening, Riolu Island melted into the distance, and the Nautilus notably changed course. After touching the Tropic of Capricorn at longitude 135 degrees, it headed west-northwest, going back up the whole intertropical zone. Although the summer sun lavished its rays on us, we never suffered from the heat, because 30 or 40 meters underwater, the temperature didn't go above 10 degrees to 12 degrees centigrade. Oh my god. But by December 15th, we had left the alluring Society Islands in the west, likewise elegant Tahiti, queen of the Pacific. In the morning, I spotted this island's lofty summits a few miles to leeward. Its waters supplied excellent fish for the tables on board. Mackerel, bonito, albacore, and a few varieties of that sea serpent named the moray eel. The Nautilus had cleared 8,100 miles. We logged 9,720 miles when we passed between Tonga Islands, where crew from the Argo, Port-au-Prince, and Duke of Portland had perished, and the island group of Samoa, scene of the slaying of Captain de Lange, friend of that long-lost navigator, the Count de la Peraso. Then we raised the Fiji Islands, where savages slaughtered sailors from the Union, as well as Captain Barreau, commander of the Darling Josephine out of Nantes, France. Thank you for the hydrate, stretch, and snack. Extending over an expanse of 100 leagues north to south, and over 90 leagues east to west, this island group lies between latitude 2 degrees and 6 degrees south, and between latitude 174 degrees and 179 degrees west. It consists of a number of islands, islets, and reefs, among which we noted the islands of Viti-Levu, Vanuatu, and Kadavu. It was the Dutch navigator Tasman who discovered this group in 1643, the same year that Italian physicist Torricelli invented the barometer, and King Louis XIV ascended the French throne. I'll let the reader decide which of these deeds was more beneficial to humanity. Coming later, Captain Cook in 1774, Rear Admiral... Oh no. That's a French name, alright. The Intercasto in 1793, and finally Captain Dumont in Duroville. See, Mr. Caesar in 1827. Okay, I'm going to put this name in the chat. Captain Beckett. You understand, then? Why I could not pronounce that. It looks like a hate crime and a blessing all at once. It's French. That's what I got. I need to learn French, I guess. Untangled the whole chaotic geography of this island group. The Nautilus drew near Wallia Bay, an unlucky place for England's Captain Dillon, who was the first to shed light on the long-standing mysteries surrounding the disappearance of ships under the Count de la Perouse. This bay, repeatedly dredged, furnished a high supply of excellent oysters. As the Roman playwright Seneca recommended, we opened them right away at our table, then stuffed ourselves. These mollusks belonged to the species known by the name Ostera lemellosa, whose members are quite common off Corsica. Corsica. The Entercasasaurus.
The Entercasasaurus!
Whose parents took out their artistic rage on their child. I think that's a surname. Wale oyster bank must have been extensive, and for certain, if they hadn't been controlled by numerous natural checks, these clusters of shellfish would have ended up jam-packing the bay, since as many as 2 million eggs have been counted in a single individual. And if Mr. Ned Land did not repent for his gluttony at our oyster fest, it's because oysters are the only dish that never causes indigestion. In fact, it takes no less than 16 dozens of these headless mollusks to supply the 315 grams that satisfy one man's minimum daily requirement for nitrogen.
A surname? No, that's a ma'am name. Like a last name, I mean.
On December 25th, the Nautilus navigated amid the island group of the New Hebrides. Her last name, yes. Which the Portuguese seafarer Coneiros discovered in 1606, which Commander Bougainville explored in 1768, and to which Captain Cook gave its current name in 1773. This group is chiefly made up of 9 large islands and forms a 120-league ship from the northwest to the south-southeast, lying between latitude 2 degrees and 15 degrees south, and between longitude 164 degrees and 168 degrees. At the moment of our noon sights, we've passed fairly close to the island of Aurore, which looked to me like a mass of green woods crowned by a peak of great height.
I'm pretty sure more names have existed since that one, Athena. Silly Athena. Oh, you're right. What was I thinking?
That day, it was Yuletide, and it struck me that Ned Land badly missed celebrating Christmas, that genuine family holiday where Protestants are such zealots.
Oh, okay.
I'm aware of that. Hold up. I hadn't seen Captain Nemo for over a week when, on the morning of the 27th, he entered the main lounge, as usual acting as if he'd gone for just 5 minutes. I was busy tracing the Nautilus course on the map. The captain approached, placed a finger over the position on the chart, and pronounced just one word. Vanikoro. This name was magic. It was the name of those insulets where vessels under the Count de la Poros had miscarried. I straightened suddenly. The Nautilus is bringing us to Vanikoro? I asked.
Yes, Professor, the captain replied.
And I'll be able to visit those famous islands where the compass and the astrolabe came to grief.
If you like, Professor.
When will we reach Vanikoro?
We already have, Professor. This guy has some beef with the Protestants, apparently. Beef. No, pork.
Followed by Captain Nemo, I climbed onto the platform, and from my eyes eagerly scanned the horizon. In the northeast, there emerged 2 volcanic islands of unequal size, surrounded by a coral reef whose circuit measured 40 miles. We were facing the islands of Vanikoro proper, to which Captain Dumont d'Orville had given the name Island of the Search. We lay right in front of the little harbor of Anna, located at latitude 16 degrees 4 south and longitude 164 degrees 32 east. Its shores seemed covered with greenery from its beaches to its summit inland, crowned by Mount Capogo, which is 476 fathoms high. After clearing the outer belt of rocks via a narrow passageway, the Nautilus lay inside the beakers where the sea had a depth of 30 to 40 fathoms, under the green shade of some tropical evergreens. I spotted a few savages who looked extremely startled at our approach. In its long, blackish object advancing flush with the water, didn't they see some fearsome cetacean that they were obligated to view with distrust?
Why not duck? Or cod even? Hi, Red Fandoms! Welcome to the stream. I hope you're doing well today.
Just then, Captain Nemo asked me what I knew about the shipwreck of the Count de la Pérouse. What everybody knows, Captain, I answered him. And could you kindly tell me what everybody knows? He asked in a gently ironic tone. Very easily.
I'm good. How are you? I'm doing all right. My voice is a little sore because I've been reading for almost 3 hours, but I'm doing all right.
I related to him what the final deeds of Captain Dumont d'Urville had brought to light, deeds described here in this heavy condensed summary of the whole matter. In 1785, the Count de la Pérouse and his subordinate, Captain de Langle, were sent by King Louis XIV of France on a voyage to circumnavigate the globe. They boarded 2 slopes of war, the Compass and the Astrolabe, which were never seen again.
I gotta take my doggo for a walk. Take care, Skelly. This is so French. It really is.
In 1791, justly concerned about the fate of these 2 slopes of war, the French government fitted 2 large cargo boats, the Search and the Hope, which left Brest on September 28th under orders from Rear Admiral Bundy Intercasteels. 2 months later, testimony from a certain Commander Bowen, aboard the Admirable, alleged that rubble from shipwrecked vessels had been on the coast of New Georgia. But the Arcastor was unaware of this news, which seemed a bit dubious anyhow, and headed towards the Admiralty Islands, which had been named in a report by one Captain Hunter as the site of Count de la Pérouse's shipwreck. They looked in vain. The Hope and Ship passed right by Vanikoro without stopping there, and overall this voyage was plagued by misfortune, ultimately costing the lives of Rear Admiral 2 of his subordinate officers and several seamen from his crew.
Fun pronouncing the whole wee words. Thank you, Kelly.
I'm basic from Friends after listening to this.
Santa, ho ho ho. Oh, story time. Yes, hello, Casey. Welcome to the stream. I hope you're doing well today. French fish story time. Yay!
It was an old hand at the Pacific, the English adventurer Captain Peter Dillon, who was the first to pick up the trail left by castaways from the wrecked vessels. On May 15, 1824, his ship, the St. Patrick, passed by Tikopia Island, one of the New Hebrides. There, a massive boatman pulled alongside in a tugboat canoe and sold Dillon a silver sword hilt bearing the imprint of a character engraved with a cutting tool known as a burin. Furthermore, this native boatman claimed that during a stay in Vanikoro 6 years earlier, he had seen 2 Europeans belonging to ships that had run aground on the ship's reefs many years before. Dillon guessed that the ships at issue were those under the Count de la Pérouse, ships whose disappearance had shaken the entire world. He tried to reach Vanikoro, where, according to the native boatman, a good deal of the rubble from the shipwreck could still be found, but winds and currents prevented him from doing so. Dillon returned to Calcutta, where he was able to interest the Asiatic Society and the East Indian Company in his discovery. A ship named after the search was placed at his disposal, and he departed on January 23rd, 1827, accompanied by a French deputy. This new search, after putting in at several stops over the Pacific, dropped anchor before Vanikoro on July 7th, 1827, in the same harbor of Havana where the Nautilus was currently floating. There, Dillon collected many relics of the ship: iron utensils, anchors, eyelets from pulleys, swivel guns, an 18-pound shell, the remains of some astronomical instruments, a piece of stern rail, and a bronze bell bearing the description made by Bazin, the foundry mark of Brest Arsenal around 1785. There could no longer be any doubt. Finishing his investigations, Dillon stayed at this site of the casualty until the month of October. Then he left Vanikoro, headed towards New Zealand, dropped anchor at Calcutta on April 7th, 1828, and returned to France, where he received a very cordial welcome from the King Charles X. But just as the renowned French explorer Captain de Montorville, unaware of Dillon's activities, had already set sail to search elsewhere for the site of the shipwreck. In essence, a whaling vessel had reported that some metal in a cross of St. Louis had been found in the hands of savages on the Louisade Islands and New Caledonia. Bag with the beans in it, yes. The bean bag looks so comfy. It is comfy. Recommend. Lumps, scrumpses. My mouth is not working anymore. This is probably the last chapter, I'm afraid, for now. Till next week. But what was it? So Captain de Montorville had put to sea in command of a vessel named after the astrolabe, and just 2 months after Dillon had left Vanikoro, de Montorville dropped anchor before Hobart. There he heard about Dillon's findings, and he further learned that a certain James Hobbs, chief officer in the Union out of Kolkata, had put the shore on an island located in latitude 18 south and longitude 156 degrees 30 east, and had noted the natives of those waterways making use of iron bars and red fabric. Okie dokie, I need to go stream. Hopefully I can hear Athena read French Fish again soon. Yes, next week at least. Same day. That's the schedule. Pretty perplexed, Dumont Orville didn't know if he should give credence to these reports, which had been carried in some of the less reliable newspapers. Nevertheless, he decided to start on Dillon's trail. I'll be there. Yay! On February 10th, 1828, the new astrolabe hove before Topeka Tikopia Island, took on a guide and interpreter and the first of a deserter who had settled there, plied a course towards Vanikoro, raised it on February 12th, sailed along the reefs until the 14th, and only on the 20th, dropped anchor inside its barrier in the harbor of Havana. On the 23rd, several officers circled the island and brought some rubble of little importance. The natives, adopting a system of denial and evasion, refused to guide them to the site of the casualty. This rather shady conduct aroused the suspicion that the natives had mistreated the castaways, and in truth the natives seemed afraid of that Dumont d'Orville had come to avenge the Count de la Perouse and his unfortunate companions. But on the 26th, appeased when gifts and seeing that they hadn't need to fear any reprisals, the natives led the chief officer, Mr. John Quinault, to the site of the shipwreck. At this location, in 3 or 4 fathoms of water between Pau and the Vanna reefs, there lay some anchors, cannons, and ingots of iron and lead, all caked with limestone concretions. A launch and whaleboat from the new astrolabe were stirred to this locality, and after going to exhausting lengths, their crews managed to dredge up an anchor weighing 1,800 pounds, a cast iron 8-pounder cannon, a lead ingot, and 2 copper swivel guns. Questioning the natives, Captain Dumont d'Orville also learned that after La Perouse's 2 ships had miscarried on the island's reefs, the Count had built a smaller craft, only to go off and miscarry a second time. Where? Nobody knew. The commander of the new astrolabe then had a monument erected under a tuft of mangrove in memory of the famous navigator and his companions. It was a simple quadrilateral pyramid, set on a coral base with no ironwork to tempt the natives' avarice. Then Dumont d'Orville tried to depart, but his crew were run down from the fevers raging on these unsanitary shores, and quite ill himself, he was unable to weigh anchor until March 17th. Meanwhile, fearing that Dumont d'Orville wasn't abreast of Dillon's activities, the French government led a sloop of war to Vanikoro. The Bayonnaise, under the commander Legarnat de Torelmin, who had been stationed on the American west coast, dropping anchor before Vanikoro a few days after the new astrolabe's departure. The Bayonnaise didn't find any additional evidence, but verified that the salvages hadn't disturbed the memorial honoring the Count de la Perouse. This is the substance of the account I gave Captain Nemo. So, he said to me, the castaways built a 3rd ship on Vanikoro Island, and to this day nobody knows where it went and perished. Nobody knows. Captain Nemo didn't reply, but signaled me to follow him to the main lounge. The Nautilus sank a few meters beneath the waves, and the panels opened. I rushed to the windows and saw a crust of coral, fungus coral, Siphonola coral, Alcyon coral, sea anemone from the genus Chirophilia, plus myriads of charming fish including greenfish, damselfish, sweepers, snappers, and squirrelfish. Underneath this coral covering, I detected some rubble the old dredges hadn't been able to tear free. Iron stirrups, anchors, cannons, shells, tackle from a capstan, a stem post, all objects healing from the wrecked ships now carpeted in moving flowers. And as I stared at this desolated wreckage, Captain Nemo told me in a solemn voice, Commander de la Perouse set out on December 7th, 1785, with his ship, the Compass, and the Astrolabe. He dropped anchor first at Botany Bay, visited the Tonga Islands in New Caledonia, headed towards Santa Cruz Islands, and put up at Nomuka, one of the islands in the Hapai group. When his ship arrived in the unrowed reef in Vanikoro, traveling in the lead, the Compass ran afoul of beakers on the southerly coast. The Astrolabe went to its rescue and also ran aground. The first ship was destroyed almost immediately. The second stranded to leeward, held up for some days. The natives gave the castaways a fair enough welcome. The latter took up residence on the island and built a smaller craft with rubble from the 2 larger ones. A few seamen stayed voluntarily in Vanikoro. The others, weak and ailing, set sail with the Count de la Perouse. They headed to the Solomon Islands, and they perished with all hands on the westerly coast of the chief island of the group, between Cape Deception and Cape Satisfaction. And how do you know all this? I exclaimed. Here's what I found on the very site of that final shipwreck. Captain Nemo showed me a tin box, stamped with the seal of arms of France and all corroded by salt water. He opened it, and I saw a bundle of papers, yellow but still legible. They were the actual military orders given by France's Minister of the Navy to Commander La Perouse with notes along the margin of the handwriting of King Louis the 14th. Ah, what an excellent death for a seaman, Captain Nemo then said. A coral grave is a tranquil grave, and may heaven grant that my companions and I rest in no other. End of chapter. Hi, Athena. Hi, Marcel. Welcome to the stream. I hope you're doing well today. I think if I read any further, I'm going to lose my voice. So we're gonna go ahead and end stream for now. I'm going to check and see if Elliot started streaming yet. Because if he has, I'm going to go raid him. It does not look like it. Darn. But Buka's live. We'll do Buka. This is a fitting way to wind down during running a naval-themed D&D campaign. It really is. I hope you all had a marvelous time listening to me read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. We're not done yet. We're only 37% of the way through the story, after all. But we are stopping today. For now. So I can still have my voice for tomorrow and Sunday. If you haven't already and you enjoyed the stream, do feel free to follow. Have a nice time, Zone Athena. Get some good rest. I appreciate it, Marcel. I've just been reading for 3 hours straight, so it's probably a good idea to rest my voice. Alright. Buka Chandros. If you do feel free to mosey on over to YouTube, where the VOD of this and the first YouTube where the VOD of this and the first stream for 20,000 Leagues is. I will see you all next time. Bye bye.